holding a piece of wood in his hand. King, a drop hunter, finds himself facing a low-class wolf. Even though the creature is quite weak, he struggles against it. In this world our protagonist lives in, he can only defeat monsters that are almost defeated by other hunters. Now, one of those hunters, who is furious, faces our protagonist. At this moment, he wonders what will happen to him from now on. Besides not being able to face this creature one-on-one, in this world, he is known more as a burden to society. These are the hunters who can't fight monsters right away. As soon as he thought about what he should be doing to defeat this wolf, we see the wolf acting firsthand. The little creature charges at our protagonist, but he doesn't let it go unanswered. Armed with a shield and a wooden sword, he charges at the little wolf. However, his shield and sword are broken on the wolf's first charge. Everything he had in hand was shattered, and he falls to the ground. The wolf also falls on top of our protagonist, sinking its teeth into the boy. At this moment, he understands how Trash feels. But even Trash had an advantage over him, and now that he is nothing but a loser, he can only accept his end. Well, that's what he thought at the moment. However, that's not what he wanted next. Our protagonist grabs the broken sword handle and thrusts it into the wolf after charging at it. Maybe we could see that this wolf could have easily defeated him. To understand how he got there, we need to go back a bit. Today, I bring you a story where our protagonist becomes a gravedigger in any town out there. We see a hunter heading towards a portal, but as he walks towards that portal, he notices someone inside it running full speed towards him. Upon closer inspection, it's King. He was the unknown guy running towards this hunter. However, what made him run so fast from that portal was the monster chasing him from behind. At this moment, he also wanted to catch our protagonist. But as soon as he emerged from that portal, we see another hunter there dealing with the creature that also wanted to come out of the portal. As soon as that creature was defeated by that hunter, we see our protagonist taking care of things. He even wondered what would happen to him if he let that thing fall behind, because in this world, it's worth a good amount of money. But even though it's worth a lot, higher-ranked hunters make the weaker hunters collect these things. Thinking about what he would gain from this job he did there, we see only one hunter who was nearby stepping on that box. After stepping on that box, he asks our protagonist if he had secretly taken one of those fragments that were inside that box. He, who has worked in this field for a long time, already knew the rules to avoid future problems, so he just tells what he did during that raid. As soon as our protagonist says this, the hunter leaves him aside. But then our protagonist turns to the portal, and we see two more hunters running out of the portal. Here we see something that possibly happened during that raid. For some reason, the hunters cleared a specific part of the raid, leaving some things behind. Living monsters, this is what the hunters deal with, only picking up the drops left behind. Our protagonist suffers greatly encountering these monsters along the way, but for him, all he's been through is now part of his life. Inside a bus, we can see him holding his reward for today. He only collected a small fraction of the leftover trash. Even though what he holds in his hand is quite little, for him, it's good because this money is no longer his. In the past, he borrowed $1 million from some loan sharks, and now he owes them a bit. After working hard on these drops, our protagonist has already paid half of what he owed. His thoughts are interrupted when one of these guys approaches him. The man offers him an additional job since our protagonist was eager for money. He offers a unique job that pays much more than what he earned from this ride. He wonders how such a high commission could be happening, and he didn't know about it. Since he's desperate for money, he could help them collect some things. Our protagonist, hearing this, simply accepts. Now, inside the bus, they follow the path to where they are going. Inside the bus, we can see people chatting among themselves. One of them mentioned that things have gotten much worse than before. Before, it was like they were playing, but now, the hunters want to put those with no fighting power in front lines and send them to high-level hides without caring about their lives. While they talk about this, we see our protagonist here listening to everything. 10 years ago, a portal connecting the real world to the abyss appeared in our protagonist's world. As soon as that portal appeared, many monsters emerged from it and wreaked havoc on this world. However, after the complete destruction of the world, hunters started appearing out of nowhere. They managed to deal with these monsters, basically cleaning up all the monsters in the world. Now they go to the abyss to take care of the monsters, but inside the abyss there are magical crystals. Not only that, but inside these abysses, you could also find magical items like legendary weapons or common weapons, or even potions worth some money. This discovery led to the discovery of a new continent for the second time, which further accelerated the world's development. As the worlds evolved, so did the companies. They didn't want low-level hunters, which made our protagonist suffer a bit. His sister got sick, and he basically needed to pay for her treatment in the hospital, which was becoming more expensive. He says that if he doesn't pay, the doctors might have to disconnect some things. Our protagonist, who means no harm to his family, tries to find several jobs. But even after trying to find various jobs, he doesn't find any. His reputation declines, and due to this, people who trusted him start talking behind his back, which makes our protagonist desperate. At this moment, luck appears. A guy handed him a card that he could possibly become a hunter, but his rank wouldn't be high. However, for our protagonist, it was better than before. Now he sighs because he sees that his debt with Agate was coming to an end. Or what was that about? After sighing there, he ends up standing up because an extra comments to our protagonist that after getting $1 million from Agate, he kind of put all that into an investment, but he was unlucky to lose it all. Now he has to chase some money to pay it all back. Our protagonist already knew the mistake he made and lowers his head. Besides all this, he has a sister with an illness that was hard to cure, but she always needed our protagonist's help. With all these problems on hand, the extras end up asking why he continues to live. Ignoring these guys' stupid questions, she ends up getting to the point where she should have gotten to a while ago. Upon arriving, we can see some hunters calling for them, who were supposed to have started the raid a while ago, but the scavengers somehow took a bit longer. To not be interrogated by these hunters, they simply apologize. After that, they enter the portal, and the rest follow. Our protagonist stands in front of this portal. This time he might have the chance to make a lot of money, but he needs to come back alive. Feeling confident that he would return alive, our protagonist enters the portal. Now our protagonist is entering a slightly different raid because for the first time, he's entering a B-rank raid. As soon as he enters, he's surprised by all the stuff that's there. But the hunters there don't stand still for long. One of them notices monsters coming their way, and yes, after noticing, several wolf monsters appear in front of them. As soon as they appear, the tank asks one of the mages there to handle these types of monsters. So it's done, and in front of them several ghost monsters to catch them. But the guy starts walking slowly towards these wolves. After a while, he stops, and the wolves were about to devour the little creature. But at that moment, he snaps his fingers, and a fireball appears, heading towards the wolves. Then an explosion occurs. After this explosion, those wolves that were there were thrown up. Some ran to avoid being caught again, but our shield asks everyone to stay prepared. The wolves aren't running. They are basically repositioning themselves to ambush them again, so they needed to stay alert. While I was thinking about this, the other one asks this brute where they would be going. So the brute shouts to the hunters to follow him because they would now be going up to the 5th floor. But he comments that the 5th floor is the most dangerous. There, for some reason, some monsters started to mutate. The hunters sent last time unfortunately didn't return, so they were curious about what was happening up there. Thus, they had the objective to climb to the 5th floor. They wonder if someone is aiming to go there, so they start walking. But one of the hunters stops to tie his shoelaces. While one ties, another one asks the garbage collectors not to get separated from him because if they do, they won't go back to help these garbage collectors. While saying this, we can see that hunter tying his shoelace. Behind that guy, our protagonist walks, looking sideways, and he doesn't notice the presence of this hunter who is there on the ground tying his shoelace. Just then, he kicks the guy's shoulder. The guy falls, and once on the ground, he kind of wonders if he's blind. He grabs our protagonist by the collar and lifts him up. However, one of the guys asks him to leave this garbage collector alone because it's not worth messing with this guy. Their first mission was simple: don't mess with this stranger. They need to find the 5th floor soon. So it was done. He throws our protagonist aside and tells this garbage collector to find his way again. If this happens again, he won't forgive our protagonist. Now that he's on the ground, our protagonist thinks that garbage collectors are basically known in the hunter's circle as useless guys. Also a disgrace to humanity. He also receives a bonus. He is humiliated within these arts by the hunters. The value of a garbage collector like our protagonist in this world is nothing. They belittle him. But that's what they thought because our protagonist's experience value was reaching 99 out of 100. What this means is that our boy will have a moment of awakening. What he really needs is to find a monster and defeat it in a one-on-one. By possibly defeating that monster, he will earn a single XP. And that single XP will level him up. Our protagonist will try to awaken as a level 1 hunter. He just needs to find a single opportunity, and it has appeared early on for our boy. In front of him, a ghost wolf appeared. We can already see the sparkle in our boy's eyes as he looked and saw an opportunity in front of him. He looks to the side and sees a shield and a wooden sword. He thinks of grabbing them, but the wolf that suddenly appears almost catches him. We see him easily dodging this bite. Now that he has dodged, we see him standing there. This was the unique opportunity of his life, and he has waited for this his whole life. Our hero will have to fight with all he has. As he said this, our protagonist starts walking towards that wolf. However, the wolf was also prepared for everything, but our hero was much more than just that creature, and our hero goes all out against it. He leaps towards it, then quickly jumps back with a piece of wood in hand, hitting its head. However, nothing happens. But that wasn't enough. He tries to strike its head again, hoping this time the monster's head would break. Instead, it's his sword that breaks, and the monster's head is unharmed. As he steps back, we can see his companions in the background urging him to leave, as this creature could easily overpower our brave boy. This might cost him his life. He hears this, but even hearing it from his friends, he stands firm. Not for long, though, as he soon has to run from the wolf. For some reason, the wolf leaves no opening for him to attack, despite being weaker. Sung, our deep web boy, realizes he's the one struggling the most, but he wouldn't give up easily. At this moment, our hero runs to a certain point and then jumps back, landing behind the wolf. He strikes its head with the piece of wood with all his might. As he damages the wolf, the scene cuts to another place. Here, we see the companions of our protagonist advancing, finishing off the remaining monsters. They are now waiting for the scavengers who for some reason lag behind, only hindering their progress. The hunters have not only finished off the monsters, but also picked up the best items dropped during this raid. Strong hunters like them have the option to get the most valuable items, while those who lack strength are left behind. But even though they don't get the best items, these strong hunters leave behind the worthless ones for the scavengers. As one of them mocks the scavengers, another points in a different direction, saying that more monsters are approaching, and they need to deal with them. Returning to our main focus, we can see a scene where the wolf bites our boy's shoulder. He's thrown back, showing his despair, fearing he might die or be considered worthless. He doesn't want that. He then grabs the remaining piece of his wooden sword, raises it high, and stabs it into the wolf's head. The creature roars in pain as it dies. Our protagonist nearly collapses, but realizes he delivered a critical blow to the wolf. It falls dead, and he stands victorious. He lets out a loud cheer, which catches the attention of the hunters. Approaching him, one of them can't believe he managed to defeat a low-level wolf alone. But if our hero wants to play the part, he'll have to endure a bit of suffering. A guy like him, considered worthless, won't receive any rewards for defeating such a weak monster. But for him, defeating the ghost wolf, which he considered superior, is a significant victory. He lets out a triumphant shout, but it might cost him his life. Our guy was always looking for this because there he ends up explaining some things when the accumulated experience point reaches level 1. Even being the person of the lowest level, you could have that small chance. Your small chance could make our protagonist change jobs. He could be awakening as a squire, a healer, or even a mage with high rank. But to achieve these goals, it was basically necessary to find a way to get points in the middle of raids. And whenever our protagonist saw his opportunity, our guy would always send his Rasta towards the monsters that were always left behind, the ones the hunters didn't want. But our guy embraced it, and so he spent the years, and in these years, he risked his life a lot to find some openings to even get a single point to level up his system. After years and years, it started accumulating. From 10, it jumped to 30, from 30, it jumped to 90, but it reached 99. And there he had to suffer to defeat this ghost wolf. After suffering, our protagonist achieved what he so desired, the 100%. And at that moment, this was the only way for our protagonist to awaken a second class, and it was also an easier way to gain experience. The conditions for the class awakening were met by our protagonist. The system understood that our guy could have that second awakening. The system updates. The guy who was in front of him couldn't believe that this kid really got some experience to possibly change jobs. The system appears in front of our protagonist, congratulates the kid for achieving level 1, and there he got what he wanted. He managed to awaken a second job. He's level 1. His companion there is surprised at the moment by the awakening of our prota, but then he can't hold back his laughter. He starts laughing. Our protagonist did manage to change jobs. Before, his job was rubbish, but now he got an even worse job than before. He saw that our hero awakened as a gravedigger. Then he approaches our protagonist and says that he had the opportunity to change classes, but he was unlucky to get a class that wasn't as dignified in his view. The kid mocks him, but he got tired of mocking our protagonist, and here he starts to say that the other trash pickers who were there end up pulling up, and now only our protagonist is left, and he will have to perform this mission of collecting everything there for them. While saying this to our protagonist, he ends up going ahead. Now that he's left behind, our protagonist wonders if this class he awakened to was really that weak, but he also wonders if the Gravedigger class was strong or weak like that. Then he turns to that kind of monster that was knocked down by those hunters. When he looks at that type of wolf, the system shines. Our guy sees something strange happening in front of him. A system screen appears saying that the ghost wolf could basically be sucked by our protagonist, and there he could recycle everything that the wolf has. All he had to do was press recycle. Our protagonist then presses it, and as soon as he does, behind our hero, several MS appear. Those hands that appeared behind our protagonist start walking little by little towards the creature that was just dust on the ground after. Walk a little bit. Those things there end up grabbing onto the body of that monster. And at that moment, our protagonist understands a bit that this ability of his could be working like that. So after that corpse of that wolf is dragged all the way inside, in front of our protagonist appears something written, "Recycle garbage." All he had to do was accept the proposal, so he accepted it. Our hero's system starts to clear everything up after everything is done there in front of our protagonist. A hand emerges. That hand ends up handing our protagonist an attribute card. Those things were basically removed from the wolf, and now our protagonist has the chance to gain the wolf's abilities. As soon as he realizes this, he asks the system to open the system's priority panel, which then shows our protagonist's statistics. Now, looking at that was simple. He looks again at that card in the hand of that thing there. He realizes he needs 3 points in agility, and at that moment, he has 3 points. He ends up putting all 3 points into agility. As soon as he put those 3 points into agility, our protagonist then has the option to use that ability and the wolf's card in front of him. As soon as he realizes this from the system, our protagonist asks the system to put it inside our big boy, and our web-deep sug here starts to feel the rock entering him. And a round web, a green light circles the kid. But then, after closing his eyes and opening them, he realizes it's all over, but he feels a bit strange. However, he didn't have enough time to notice his new powers because someone calls for our protagonist. He needed to appear in front of them as quickly as possible, so it's done. He tried to run in a normal way, but it didn't work here, from the deep web, so he ended up putting one foot in front and with the other, he started running. But now it was different. With just one leap, he managed to run like he had never run before in his life. While running there, he stumbled upon a Vinhero and then fell face first onto the ground. Now that he was on the ground, he realized that maybe this was a skill he had gained from the system. However, to use the same skill he used here again, he would have to wait a bit. After waiting a while, it seemed to recharge, and he could use that DH again to run at that speed. Now understanding how it works, he gets up, but now he takes a closer look at it. And even looking at it, he doesn't understand how these abilities could work differently. However, he was eager to acquire other skills. So he looks to the side and notices several corpses of those same ghost wolves that our protagonist had recently sucked in. Those hunters left all of that for our protagonist, right? But at this moment, facing that pile of bodies, our protagonist realizes that he might not only be able to acquire the skills of those monsters, but also gain some kind of experience. All this that was appearing in front of him was thanks to the skill he had just awakened called Gravedigger. Realizing he could absorb that pile of monsters into himself, he activates the Gravedigger skill. After activating this skill, several of those appear behind our protagonist, devouring the wolves left and right. Then our protagonist is putting the new hacks to the test. After using that devouring system, our protagonist starts receiving infinite points from the system. He managed to earn points that in his life he took several years to accumulate, but this wasn't all that positive, it seems. The monsters our protagonist managed to devour did something different. Now our protagonist gained new abilities from the system, but he noticed something here. After devouring that many monster corpses, our protagonist realized that if he devoured too many monsters at once, the level of experience and perhaps the chance to acquire a skill from the monster itself would be greatly reduced. So it means that if our boy doesn't want a stolen skill, he will have to devour one by one, or he could simply devour 9 monsters. By devouring 9 monsters, our protagonist would get 9 rewards, some good, some bad. But now our protagonist receives some points from the system. He has only 111 points. Our protagonist sees that points won't be a problem for him in the future, and he could distribute them as he pleases, but he wonders where he should allocate the points first. However, our protagonist doesn't think about where to allocate them. He just starts distributing them across these attributes. He increases a bit of health, then a bit of luck as he needed it. Our boy goes crazy, rolling his attributes non-stop while he levels up his attributes elsewhere. We can see that group of hunters who were finishing up, dragging up some wolves that survived. As soon as they finish dragging up the last one, we see the brute changing the subject, commenting that the unlucky one, that garbage collector, managed to awaken his class here. However, the class our protagonist awakened was a class he had never even seen on the list. Changing jobs might be rare, but the other said it could possibly be. Yet in the end, it would just be a pretty useless classification for someone like our protagonist. He was average, but even though he awakened with a hidden class, our protagonist wouldn't be that strong. He's just a level 1 guy. So in the end, our protagonist would possibly have the strength of an average person, or a bit more, which wouldn't change anything for him. So since it wouldn't change anything, he asked to ignore this class and move on because he needed to reach the last floor. So they kept walking, and there they encountered a kind of tunnel. After walking a bit, they saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Walking towards it, they emerged into that light, where they came face to face with these strange roots. Among these roots were some creatures or things stuck to them. The people there wondered what happened, but after thinking a bit, they understood that these could possibly be those hunters who entered here and never came out. One of them was on top of one of these hunters, who was trapped inside this tree. He realized that by staying here for too long, this guy turned into dried salt right there. And possibly the same thing happened to him because maybe there was a guy or a mage or monster enemy with a high magic rating. But our tough guy turns to another and asks if this place was some kind of B rank. Then they would be hunters of a much higher rank than a B rank hunter, so they shouldn't have difficulties fighting these monsters. If it wasn't the monsters that defeated them, then what was it? Just then, one looked to the side and saw several monsters emerging from underground. One of them grabbed our tough guy's leg, while those hunters were trying to deal with those undead creatures outside. On an open TV, someone commented that the hunters had been inside that portal for hours and none had come out. But while talking about the hunters, we can see our tough guy asking everyone to gather in a corner because things got worse for them. He realized they had fallen into some kind of trap. Escaping now would be nearly impossible, but the one who likes to tease our protagonist didn't want to stand still. He used a fireball, and the tough guy also used his shield to defeat these monsters, but that wasn't enough because the monsters revived or something. Someone was controlling them, and this was real because right after, in front of the tough guy, appeared the boss of this floor. This was a high-level boss. At this moment, the hunters didn't even think twice about staying there because if they stayed, they would undoubtedly be attacked. But just as they thought this, several hunters who had transformed into those monsters flew towards the other hunters. To avoid being caught, with all his might, he fought against these creatures. While this was happening in another place, we can see our protagonist finishing his last collection. However, while finishing his last collection, he hears a scream from the background. At this moment, he gets scared and wonders what that scream was, but he ignores it as the system appears in front of him. Now, our protagonist achieved an achievement for the first time. As soon as he achieved this, the kid becomes very happy because he could possibly receive his first reward. After waiting for a while for his reward to load, in front of him appears something. It was a dagger that was so far useless and weak, disappointing our protagonist. He thought a high-ranking weapon would come, but since it didn't, he had to accept it. However, thinking about what he could do to get better items, our hero hears the scream again, but this time, it's much louder than before, catching his attention. He turns towards the screams and is startled to see someone running towards him, screaming. It was one of those monsters attacking the hero's group. When he sees this, our protagonist is so startled that not even the Wi-Fi could pass through him. But the monster didn't want to just watch. Thinking about a plan, he tries to grab our protagonist, but he jumps back, dodging the first attack. Once he dodged the monster's strike, he wanted to counterattack, but he's surprised that he managed to dodge that move. He thought he might have been done for, but looking closer at himself, he realizes he's much faster. Maybe it's because of the points he allocated in his system. Feeling stronger now, he possibly could defeat this beast in front of him, but just as he thinks that, the monster also thinks of doing the same to our protagonist. As the monster strikes, our protagonist dodges to the side, making the punch hit the wall. After dodging, our protagonist notices in the background that not only did he add points to his agility, but he also added points to his strength. At this moment, our protagonist uses the Soul Spirit, which allows him to dash forward. As soon as he uses it, he wants to test his punch on the monster, since it's his turn to hit. He flies towards the monster, landing a punch on its face, throwing it against the wall. As he throws it against the wall, our protagonist notices something more. He used an effect that, when punching an opponent, allows him to break 100% of its defense. So, our protagonist has a 100% advantage to win this fight. This time, our protagonist is not the same person anymore, so now he possibly can deal with any monsters. But then, our protagonist sees something else from the system. He can allocate points to intelligence. By allocating intelligence points, our protagonist can see things about these monsters that he couldn't see before. So he does that, and realizes that this monster was an elite human. Searching for its weakness, he finds out that its weak point is its neck. But when he finds this monster's weak point, the monster starts advancing towards our protagonist, and our protagonist doesn't back down. Time advances with all its speed towards the monster. He ends up launching a blow towards our prota. But to avoid getting hit, our big guy simply dodges by lowering himself, giving her a slight sweep. However, here our protagonist, he was 100% in advantage. Now he was behind her because his goal all along was to find a weakness to attack her neck. So he ends up using that small card from the system that our protagonist just received from the sword card. So when he asks the system delivers it to our protagonist. Then our protagonist sort of uses his sword to hit the critical point of that monster. With just one hit from the sword, the monster stands there bewildered, wondering what it was doing. But then our protagonist realizes he hit the monster's weak spot squarely. The monster falls to the ground, and our protagonist kills a human parasite. As soon as it falls to the ground, Our protagonist starts receiving new things from the system, but what he most wants to know is if this type of human parasite can be recycled. The system confirms this for our protagonist. As soon as it confirms, he asks the system to recycle it. Once recycled, our protagonist gains a passive poison resistance ability. What this means is that our protagonist can withstand any type of poison, and by using that card, he could basically create an antidote to counteract the poison he had taken before. So our protagonist asks the system to create a type of poison for him to test. The system does so, creating a potion for our protagonist. Looking at this card, he understands that if he drinks it, the potion will be recreated as a healing potion. So, out of curiosity, he starts sipping a little, thinking about what might happen. The system ends up recovering some of the life our protagonist lost while fighting the monsters before. But this potion not only didn't fully recover our protagonist, but also left him feeling perhaps stronger. He sets this aside for now. At this moment, our protagonist starts picking up the remaining points he had to put into intelligence. The more he puts in, the smarter he becomes. With this, our protagonist will be able to discover his opponent's weaknesses more easily. So, he distributes 5 points into intelligence, leaving our hero brimming with intelligence. While he was distributing his points in the system, he hears noises. The noises were from those monsters from before. As soon as he hears this, our protagonist sort of turns around. When he turns, our protagonist realizes that those monsters have appeared again, but now they appear a bit bigger than before, and in greater numbers. So our protagonist thinks he can now use the new abilities he acquired. Moreover, people in the world always called him trash, but now he could change that title he holds. He now wants to show the world his true strength. While thinking about what he would do to show his true strength, we see the monsters running towards him, but our protagonist was prepared, holding a machete in his hand. Now he was much calmer. He had awakened as a gravedigger, and as a gravedigger, our protagonist wouldn't let these fly monsters get in his way. He now challenges these monsters to come at him with everything they've got because he's ready to handle them all. As soon as he said this, the monsters begin to advance. In another place, we can also see the monsters advancing on those hunters. The monsters were managing to gain a slight advantage over some of the hunters. One of them even thought that if they let their guard down for a moment, it would be over for them. After all, these monsters' strength was much greater than when the person was alive. Our tough guy realizes that this boss isn't playing around, so he tells his team to retreat because they wouldn't stand a chance. They start running, but in their haste, they leave themselves open. One of the monsters attacks a member of his team, dragging him away, and another teammate gets caught by one of the monsters, becoming somewhat controlled by it. They couldn't afford to fall behind. They needed to run. While running, one of them thinks that it's impossible to escape with both of them alive. Someone needed to stay behind to distract them, so our tough guy stays back, taking care of the monsters. He just asks them to call for help as quickly as possible. While running, we see him thinking that he came here just for the money and the equipment he has. They're worth a lot. If he dies, he won't gain anything, so he needs to use everything he has to escape this raid. He then uses one of his spells, which paralyzes our tough guy. As he turns to his teammate, asking what he's doing, the guy just points towards him, saying he left someone behind to distract the monsters. Meanwhile, the monsters jump on our tough guy. We see the coward running, and as he runs, his teammate screams for help, but also smiles. We see him commenting that he has now managed to escape too, taking all his money with him. But as he runs, he doesn't look ahead and bumps into someone. This person gives a cold look to our companion, but our companion freezes, not wanting to engage. On closer inspection, he realizes this person in front of him is our protagonist. Our protagonist asks him what he was really trying to do there, using his own teammates to escape. He doesn't answer our protagonist's question. Instead, he looks back and wonders what happened to the rest of the monsters and why they are in this state, but he doesn't care anymore about what's happening. He turns to our protagonist and realizes our protagonist saw everything that happened there. If our protagonist manages to survive this, he could report him and lose everything. So, he decides to eliminate our protagonist as well. But taking the time to do it would be inefficient. He turns to our protagonist and tells him to stay back since he wanted to be a hero before. This was a good opportunity. So he kicks our protagonist in the stomach. However, by kicking him, the system gives our protagonist greater resistance. The impact of the kick is redirected towards the one who kicked him, who falls to the ground, wondering how someone like him could be so powerful. Our MC looks at him now. He understands everything that happened and now knows who the real trash is, so he's here now using his system to manage to recycle this trash. Then, those mothers grab onto this extra and he's dragged into the system. However, the system starts recycling the thing, but while recycling it, the system ends up sort of throwing it out because the trash he put in there was too rotten. and he didn't want to recycle it. So the system sort of tells our protagonist that he won't be able to gain that guy's ability below him. But there was a small chance that our protagonist could acquire that extra's ability for 3 minutes, or even more. He just needed to upgrade some things in his system. So as soon as he upgraded a few things, our protagonist manages to learn a new ability. This was the ability to control fire. As soon as he learned this ability, our protagonist starts seeing several monsters appearing in front of him. The creatures were bloodthirsty and run towards our protagonist since he gained a new ability, so he decides to test it out. As those monsters come at him, our protagonist points his hand and uses just a small fraction of his power. With this small fraction, our protagonist manages to send all these monsters flying upwards, so he's left stunned. He didn't think that recycling that ability would significantly boost his power. But while he's stunned by this new ability he acquired, we can see something appearing behind him. That creature jumps towards our protagonist and almost catches him, but he notices just in time and dodges. The creature hits the ground but isn't satisfied just with that. It runs again towards our protagonist, but he easily dodges its attack again. Now, in front of him, our protagonist summons his sword from the system and swings it towards the creature. However, it's fast and easily manages to block our protagonist's move. But while thinking about this, he looks behind and sees a hulking brute. He thinks that if he could recycle the ability of this brute, he would get a shield. So he uses his system to recycle the brute. The system grabs the brute and takes him to its own space-time, managing to recycle it. In front of him appears the brute's shield. As soon as he takes it, the golden shield, he feels hopeful to put it into practice. He just needed to test it on something around. Then, he sees this creature running towards him, eager to defeat our protagonist. Seeing it coming towards him, our guy swings this shield of his. It was good. It helped our main character get rid of this thing quickly. But as soon as he defeated it, the creature falls to the ground. And right away, our protagonist appears doing something he should have done a long time ago. So he uses his system on this creature. Using his system, he drains its abilities. Now our protagonist possesses its ability, allowing him to have a significant advantage on the battlefield. Holding a dagger in his hand, our protagonist has transformed into the master of daggers. But as soon as he notices this, he becomes more prepared because right in front of him, several of those monsters that appeared earlier show up again, trying to finish off our guy. They run towards him, but our protagonist doesn't stand still. He goes all out against these monsters, sending each of them flying while he fights. All that dragging upwards, someone from another place began to say some things about how they needed to have a first-hand mission to recover the bodies of their companions who were there. And if they happened not to recover them, they would be failing in their missions. Everything they had there inside and had managed to grab was no longer theirs. So then our protagonist takes care of the last monsters that were alive. After dealing with those living monsters, our protagonist ends up sort of recycling that creature. However, all of this was seen by him, but we'll tell you more about that later because now our big guy needed to deal with an even bigger creature. The one that appeared in front of our protagonist was the boss of that floor. Now he was facing our big guy, and our big guy was facing him. So to end this fight as quickly as possible, our protagonist ends up using sugar on him. Using sugar on this monster, our protagonist manages to easily send this boss off. As soon as he defeated this boss, the scene cuts to this place here. In an apartment, we see that extra who survived there, but he kept repeating everything he saw from our protagonist's sugar. However, the guys next to him only wanted to know what happened to him inside that hard. But what he heard from this extra was the same thing. He stole his abilities, and the only thing he asked those guys was that they could catch our protagonist and teach him a lesson. However, given his current state, they wouldn't do anything. But he continues to ask to look for that garbage collector. But already ignoring him, the scene cuts here. Inside a ride, we can already see some hunters. But while those hunters were gathered there, our protagonist was in the background talking to himself. He thought that the black market was a place where you could sell these crystals that you find in those RS, where you get a high percentage. But if you sell to a government institution, they end up taking almost 70% of all the profit you make. At this moment, our protagonist needed to make as much money as possible. And moreover, he needed to avoid drawing too much attention from the main big shots. At this moment, he just wants to make some money without even attracting anyone's attention. Our protagonist wants to take this little by little. That was his goal. But as soon as he said that, in front of him appears a leader of this group of our protagonist, who now tells them to be more careful since this was a raid that none of them had even entered before. So they should basically form a group. But those hunters who just got a new job could be getting close to the leader, as he is handing over a reward or a mission to this newcomer. But as soon as he says this, in the background, we can see our protagonist asking a question, wondering if they were basically satisfied that among them was a very weak guy. He was just a level 1 gravedigger. As soon as he said this, Geraldo there opens his eyes. Some even start laughing. He wondered how a level 1 guy like this was inside that. How did he manage to awaken such a trash class? He basically didn't need to be in the front line. He now just needed to stay in the back with the rest of the garbage collectors, and he could maybe evolve a lot here. For some, this was advantageous. For our protagonist, it was even greater. Our protagonist had a plan all along not to draw anyone's attention, and at this moment, he succeeded. And at this moment, he just didn't need to draw more attention than this point here from Tiraldo there himself, so he needs to leave. But as soon as he thought of this, someone from behind appears there. That guy was clinging to our PR's hand and didn't want to let go. Seeing this, he ends up asking him to let go once and for all. So he lets go, but then he starts commenting that they didn't need anyone else in this raid. They already got the ideal people. But he ends up saying they didn't really need anyone. But however, there was one person missing from the group, and our protagonist, even being weak, would be welcome in their group. So our protagonist sees that he could still move forward with them. So he ends up kind of sinking back. Our white-haired girl looked at our protagonist, but then she revealed her name. At that moment, our protagonist remembered that he had heard this name only once before in his life. So memories of his past began to awaken. Our protagonist saw her in a very risky situation. She could have been dragged away, but from there he grabbed an old knife of his and tried his luck. He sent a monster dragging her away, and by doing so, he gained some XP. However, the monster fell flat on the ground, and our protagonist stood there, frozen. The girl behind him wondered if he was okay, but our white-haired girl was surprised to see our protagonist getting up. He was happy and shouted that it was a success. His experience had increased, so killing wolves was worth more than picking up trash. After leveling up a bit, our protagonist turned to our white-haired girl and asked if she was okay. However, his question was only to see if she was all right, but
The protagonist turns to our fair-skinned girl and asks if she happened to be okay, but his question was really to see if she was okay. Just that, but his question is changed now. She then asks our protagonist if he was alright in the head, because he was risking his life to earn these small XP. But that wasn't the main point. She asks what level our protagonist was. Furthermore, she wanted to know if our protagonist was staying in this raid just to get XP or something like that, or if he was going into this raid to get other things. Our protagonist replied that he only came to this raid to get money, nothing more, nothing less than that. She then approaches him again and asks if he was risking his life for these small amounts of money. But as soon as she asks him this, he kind of turns to her and makes another one of these. These are the types of classes where people could change jobs at will. She here was even a rich girl, so for her to change classes wasn't difficult. For our protagonist, known throughout the world as Trash, he didn't have money for the class upgrade, so he would have to risk his life nonetheless. Furthermore, he ends up asking her why she was also risking her own life to fight these monsters, since she has no reason to want to fight these things like that. So after asking this question, she quickly responds, saying that she was doing it to protect the weakest. Furthermore, her life goal is to become the strongest person. But then, she ends up asking our protagonist why he wanted to change jobs so badly. He just ends up replying that it was just to protect his family, the thing he loves the most in the world. This was something that she liked about our prota. Asking his name, he reveals his name as Websound, or just our Kingin. So after hearing our PR's name, she introduces herself as well. After introducing herself, she waits for our protagonist in the future, because in the future, they could basically be friends again and fight side by side to defeat some monsters. Well, this was a good proposal for our prota, so as soon as he heard that, he ends up accepting right away. So after accepting the proposal, she asks our protagonist to be a little more careful. The world out there was dangerous, so he just needed to get strong. While thinking about this, from the background, two bodyguards appear and approach her, asking her not to wander around anymore, because it would be dangerous. And furthermore, she asks the trash collector of our protagonist to leave near the lady. As soon as he leaves, dragged away, we see her trying to apologize for things, but still, she is dragged away, unable to talk to our protagonist. She simply throws something in our prota's direction. He ends up grabbing it. What he grabbed was a kind of reward for him having sort of protected her there just now. Understanding what she meant by that, he simply turns away, because now he ended up leaving to basically level up his class. Our story continues in the next chapter of the previous one there. We can observe this guy taking advantage of our protagonist, saying that someone weak like him shouldn't be here. Furthermore, he questions how he got accepted into their group, stating he shouldn't be lagging behind and should start moving now. So he starts walking, not wanting to become an obstacle for them. He notices our protagonist, who is almost ready to enter the portal, instructing the weak ones to grab their equipment because they're about to enter the portal and they don't know what's inside. Everyone agrees, and now they're ready. Our protagonist thinks he needs to do the job much better this time because he has a chance to earn some good money. However, he managed to get some things from the previous abyss. Now, he has a shield and a skill that allows him to wield 2 daggers in his hands. But the main focus is on another skill, the Basak skill. This skill gives him a significant advantage, which is already noticeable ahead. With this skill, he can finally take down any monster effortlessly. The proof that he'll survive this time is that he also managed to absorb a more special monster, the previous boss of the Ra. That allows our protagonist to have extremely high regeneration, which is also a crucial focus. Our protagonist has managed to balance all his abilities quite well, and the points will be distributed among attributes, allowing his abilities to become stronger over time. After all, he was the only one who managed to pick up everything recyclable in the previous Ra. Now, he just needed to get 6 more points to get the pair of N. But at this moment, he ends up using the Attribute Recovery Observation Eye skill. Then our protagonist starts seeing some attributes of his companions. Upon using this skill, our protagonist realizes that the points he distributed among their attributes weren't as significant as he thought. He found out that his strength was 12, but his companion, who has 100 strength, saw a huge difference between them. So, our protagonist didn't have to worry. But then, he feels something trembling on the ground, and fearing it, looks aside, only to realize that it was just the wall next to him coming at him with full force. After making that noise, the group turns around and realizes there was almost an earthquake. But looking back, they see it was our protagonist hitting the wall. He puts his hand on the wall and comments that the dungeon structure is a bit unstable, so they should be careful. However, their attention is not even directed towards him, because right after that, a figure finds a box, and someone approaches, saying that it might be difficult to open the box, because it needs to have. There was someone in the group who had the thief status, so he only thought about leaving to be opening up ahead. But at this moment, we can observe our protagonist appearing in the background, saying right there to everyone that he wanted to at least try once. He then approaches the chest, moving it a little here and there. Our protagonist manages to open that chest completely. As soon as he opened that chest, someone approaches and realizes that the skill of picking locks was not something our protagonist should be able to do, because it was required at level 5. So our protagonist refutes him, saying that an awakened one can learn various skills, and furthermore, there might be that small chance of a level 5 skill coming to someone at level 1. So, after taking all the resources from that chest, the leader appears and collects all the cards that were there and puts them in his system. Then he asks his group to get ready, because now they would be starting to climb to the next floors. But it was at this moment that our protagonist noticed something else happening. So he asks the one who was in front of him to stop a little. Not understanding, she stops. At this moment, our protagonist, who was holding the stone in his hand, simply throws it towards those walls. But when throwing it, certainly in some points, it ends up hitting some traps. And then after a few minutes there, the traps are activated, and there in front of them, a wall with some nails appears and almost crushes them. We see her thanking our protagonist because she saw that he had quite knowledge of this dungeon, or if he had infinite hacker. Our protagonist here didn't want to be caught. He just comments that he managed to just bump a little there behind and ended up discovering all the weak points of these dungeons. But who was more surprised with our protagonist was the white one. But our white one didn't want all the attention from our protagonist. She ignores him, but right after that, the system already appears for our protagonist. After the system appears, it comments that our protagonist managed to deceive the group completely, and the target here becomes more personal. And he says to himself that it was even a good idea to put many points in intelligence because he easily deceived those extras. But since our protagonist was able to enter the dungeon without even activating a single trap, the group leader simply throws a card to our protagonist. Our protagonist activates his evaluation and realizes that this card in his hand was not such a bad thing, nor so good. So he should just keep this card. So he moves on along the path. But as they follow the path, they end up being surprised by what they just found. They end up finding a type of vase and think that here would be the final level. And this place where he arrived could be like an abyss. That here would be a kind of bonus room, that they could be taking everything they want. But in front there was a cup with some red things inside it. Above it, there was something written. The system already comments that this place here was a kind of abyss where there was a unique treasure. But within this unique treasure, there was also a unique monster. But at that moment, a tank approaches that thing that was floating over that cup, and it grabs it from behind. Our protagonist simply appears, asking him to relax a bit, because things here were getting strange, and if by chance they messed with something wrong, they would be screwed from then on. But he said he was okay, because all the experiences he had in that abyss were different, and they shouldn't worry. He even removes that plate with something written from that cup, but when he removes that thing from the cup, something starts bubbling inside it, and then the system appears and comments that a blood swarm would be happening at that moment, and from that cup, something begins to emerge, and it goes up. Our group is surprised by this and prepares. Then one comments that there wasn't even a treasure there, but a trap, and they fell for it completely. Perhaps this is that monster of legend, that a monster in the past was sealed inside a cup, but now it has been set free. But this monster was known in our protagonist's world as the Dream Monster, and there's several skull-shaped things already appear ready to confront this monster. Our protagonist's system girl pulls out a dagger. Now she was ready, but at this moment, our protagonist and his group also prepare themselves because everyone there ended up kind of surrounded by these creatures, and now they had nowhere else to run. But our protagonist had no choice but to fight against these monsters. And already at this moment, he would have to use a little of his strength. He would only be using 25% of his strength to defeat these creatures. And then he sees that ring and realizes that he can also use that card he won. But at this moment, he remembers that the system warned him that if he used that card, his attributes would basically be reduced to 0, and that was something he didn't want to do. Using that thing at that moment was useless to him, but he ends up keeping that card because it will be useful in the future. But at this moment when he says that, the monsters go straight towards our protagonist's group. Our protagonist gets ready because then he ends up using the soul thread to defend himself from the monsters, and the monsters go all out against the heroes, and the creatures use everything they have. But with one blow, our protagonist defeats some of them, and she turns to him, surprised by his strength, because as he passes through those monsters, our protagonist already splits those things in half, but it didn't help. They regenerated. But at this moment, she ends up not paying attention. The dream monster appears in front of her, and she is almost caught, but she was already prepared for that. So she just looks at Kilo with the sword up and down. She ends up splitting that monster, but who was in trouble here was that warrior from our protagonist's group. Surprised by what was happening, he saw that each piece he cut, nothing happened to those monsters, and now he saw one of those dead. Preparing to attack Jer, he found himself unable to defend any longer. The reason for his inability to defend lay in the presence of the monstrous figure before him, which appeared significantly weaker. A single blow could incapacitate him. Yet this particular monster possessed a unique ability. It could harness the strength of humans, thereby doubling its own power compared to that of a mere mortal. This realization should have stirred a greater sense of concern within him, for if the monster were to fully grasp this advantage, the consequences would undoubtedly be dire. However, in a crucial moment, he managed to seize his machete and swiftly struck behind the monster, causing it to lose one of its heads in the process. Meanwhile, in the background, a voice acknowledged his commendable action, albeit expressing concern that it had momentarily distracted him. As the monster began to prepare for a counterattack, the protagonist recognized the urgency of the situation, but found himself incapable of mounting a sufficient defense. In a swift and decisive move, the monster swung its sword downward, inflicting a devastating blow that severed the appendage of a nearby bystander. Drawing closer with each step, the monster posed an imminent threat. Observing the dire situation, the individual who had praised him earlier realized their own limitations, acknowledging their inability to intervene further, just as the monster, now assuming a human form, raised its sword for a final strike. The fallen warrior faced a moment of helplessness. What course of action could he possibly take now? Uncertainty loomed, yet the monster remained resolute in its intent, launching a ferocious attack against the defenseless warrior. Amidst the impending peril, a ray of hope emerged as our heroine made a timely appearance. Employing a newfound ability, she encased the monster in ice, effectively neutralizing the threat. With a sense of accomplishment, she remarked on the insignificance of those beneath her, emphasizing their inherent weakness. Yet, as the frozen threat lay vanquished, a new danger loomed on the horizon. The once formidable monsters, now bolstered in strength, charged toward the fallen knight. However, the arrival of the mage served as a temporary deterrent, despite the limitations of her magic. Seizing the opportunity, our protagonist, driven by a desire to test his newfound abilities, unleashed a powerful explosion. The unexpected display of power left onlookers in awe, prompting speculation as to its origin. The sudden manifestation of such potent abilities from a seemingly novice individual defied conventional understanding, sparking intrigue and uncertainty. Even as the dust settled from the explosive display, the threat persisted. Undeterred by the formidable explosion, the monsters continued their relentless advance, yet the protagonist's resounding cry momentarily halted their onslaught, providing a fleeting advantage in the face of imminent danger. This was the pivotal moment for our protagonist to unveil a newfound skill. With a swift motion, he activates the basic mode. This particular ability bestowed upon our protagonist not only 100% increased speed, but also an hour of unbridled strength at 100%. With this formidable power, our protagonist could withstand anything. He charges headlong towards the monstrous adversary, delivering a single devastating punch that shatters the creature into pieces. Yet as he turns to assess the effectiveness of his strike, he is taken aback to witness the monster regenerating. However, to his astonishment, the creature doesn't revert to its smaller form, but instead transforms into a colossal behemoth. Our protagonist realizes that the situation has escalated, and the prospect of defeat looms. Despite this, a glimmer of satisfaction shines through him, for he has achieved something he desired, the ability to mimic a certain skill. Yet his satisfaction is short-lived, as he questions the unexpected appearance of a king-level monster. Such creatures were not supposed to inhabit a zone designated for lower-level encounters. This anomaly perplexes our protagonist, leading him to question the very fabric of reality. However, amidst his pondering, he discerns the reason behind the monster's unprecedented evolution. It has absorbed a fraction of his formidable strength, elevating it to a level akin to that of a king. As the A monstrous entity reaches out to seize him. Our protagonist deftly evades its grasp, causing it to clutch at empty air. Yet, despite his evasion, he finds himself sprawled on the ground, confronted with the harsh reality of his adversary's formidable strength. Nevertheless, he refuses to succumb to despair, realizing that his attributes are comparable to those of his foe. With a mano combat rendered futile, he acknowledges the need for an alternative approach. In the midst of his contemplation, his companion intervenes, urging him to retreat as she prepares to showcase her own prowess. Surprised yet reassured by her determination, he watches as she confronts the monstrous adversary head-on. Recognizing the need for a battle of equals, she stands ready to face the challenge. As the two adversaries prepare to clash, the monster strikes with lightning speed, catching her off guard. However, she swiftly turns the tables, utilizing the monster's own limb as a conduit to draw herself closer. With unparalleled determination, she grasps her blade, imbued with the chilling power of ice, and drives it into the heart of the beast. Yet the monster, ever cunning, counters her attack, freezing only a portion of its limb to thwart her efforts. Undeterred by this setback, she presses on, her resolve unyielding in the face of adversity. As the monster closes in for the kill, she braces herself for the inevitable clash, knowing that victory lies not in retreat, but in the relentless pursuit of triumph. The monster, attacking her, ends up stopping because she ended up using a skill that was quite potent. There, a shockwave ended up appearing inside that place. In the background, we can see our protagonist along with her group watching the fight that was happening. At this moment, she activates a flag that will make her much stronger, but she ends up putting it on the ground. Then the system appears, saying that it kind of inspires the speed of the allies to increase by 30% within a radius of 50%. After that, being stuck in the ground, ice begins to emerge from that flag, covering the monster completely. Now the monster was totally frozen, and she could easily kill it. Her speed increased a lot, so she will be using it to her advantage. The Ice Dominion was specialized in containing the monsters here, and even though she still can't send this train to drag up, she will at least be able to hurt this train a little bit. But even the frozen monster was still strong, only that here she possibly ended this fight because here now, she ended up splitting that monster in half. Here, possibly, our comment that her ability was a legendary profession that was only chosen by one person among those lucky ones. But currently, our protagonist was eager to see who was the strongest, that monster, or our little white girl. Our protagonist wanted to see which one was the strongest, that girl who had the powers of the gods, or that monster who had the powers of our protagonist. But oh well, the hope of being able to send that monster to drag up was low, because even his biggest blow didn't work against that monster. The monster ended up removing that ice carcass that was between him, and he moves back. And underneath, we then see our little white girl looking up. Only that, while looking up, she ends up kind of seeing that monster, already attacking her again, and those arms go all out on her. She stops to not be caught, ends up dodging, and even though she is Class S, her strength is much lower than she was always put last by her brothers and sisters. And even though her last name belonged to an extremely powerful family, her own family always left her till the end. She was the weakest of the Lu family. This was the person who was always laughed at by her family. She always ended up losing in a one-on-one, never having won against a monster or anything of the sort. And now here she was, almost being defeated by the monster. But then, she remembered those people in her family who always laughed at her, calling her weak, or by someone as weak as she was. She was a part of that family, her own family, even suggesting she should stay indoors, as it was better for her than being in an abyss. But this memory made her even more irritated, as she was always directed towards that abyss of novices, and she didn't like it. But now she remembered she had a more potent ability. She wanted to end this fight because she was always pitted against weak monsters to defeat, and now she wanted to change that. She wanted to be able to send extremely strong monsters racing towards her opponents, to show them she could do it. Now, closer than ever to that monster, she attacked it. Her sword ended up embedding into the monster's skull, but the creature was resilient. Her sword, held with all her might, was snapped in half. Our protagonist widened her eyes in surprise, but behind her, another one of those claws from the monsters appeared, coming straight at her. It caught her off guard, and she was thrown against the wall. There, we could see her against the wall, a little blood escaping her lips. At that moment, our mage had placed all her trust in our protagonist, that she would be able to defeat this monster easily. Seeing her easily defeated was a shock. Even an S-rank hunter had been defeated. So, what was the point of staying there? They should be fleeing, but the monsters wouldn't allow it. The monster began to run towards another person, but that person was our protagonist. Our protagonist ended up running towards that person too, and they ended up colliding. An explosion occurred near the monster's hand, and it lost a bit of its arm. The arm that was lost in that explosion flew in another direction, towards the group that saw it coming. They simply decided to run, not wanting to be caught by that piece of arm. After the group ran to a corner where they wouldn't be caught by it, in the other direction, we could already see our protagonist, holding her sword with a determined look in her eyes. She watched our protagonist as he moved at full speed towards the monster. Would our protagonist be able to defeat this monster? He needed help from the system, so he activated the observation eye to find the monster point. Found it. But if the monster reached the king with its own resistance and abnormal conditions, so our protagonist needed to overcome it. So if his level is self-sufficient, he can kind of become completely immune to freezing and torture or paralysis. But the weak point was that as the level increased, another restriction wasn't really necessary here anymore. So all the attributes of our protagonist should be unlocked, and here only his hand starts to catch fire. But the fire was much more potent. Only that punch that our protagonist was preparing. He simply throws at that monster for thinking that this punch he threw at that monster was enough to send it dragging up. Wasn't. No, the monster ended up sort of managing to retaliate against our protagonist. But for our protagonist not to be caught, he starts running. He starts running at full speed. They saw that he was fast. While they saw this, we see our white one taking a healing potion to heal while healing. We see our protagonist taking some jumps there. After dodging the attack of that monster, he ends up kind of slipping back a bit. Now behind our protagonist. He sees that so far he couldn't find a specific weakness for this monster, but all the monsters he has encountered had a weakness, and he needed to find that weakness, so concentrating all the power within himself, our 2 hands of fire in hand, to be being thrown in the direction of that monster now attacking him head on. He saw that even if he attacked with everything, that monster would be able to regenerate, so there was no weakness for him to be able to defeat it easily, but there was a weakness inside or not inside. Our protagonist saw that this monster was being remotely controlled, which meant that something outside was controlling it. So after thinking that there was a control controlling it, he ends up stopping to think. And then after thinking a little, he turns to his group, and there he ends up asking his group to hand him that block there to explain better. He ends up asking for that cube that they ended up sort of removing just now there before to be thrown in his direction. He asked for that tank to kick with all its strength, that train. In his direction, the request was made. The boy kicked that train. The kick was so powerful that it flew at another speed in his direction. Flying in his direction, the system explains that in order for the curse they are fighting to be broken, it was necessary to cast a spell for that curse to be broken. But their solution was before their eyes, so they needed to sort of get hold of it. But that thing began to be faster than our hero, because that train ended up grabbing that block that was flying in its direction. That monster, after grabbing that block, ends up putting it in its mouth. And now the monster ended up getting a new title, a title more superior than it had before. He now had the invincible mode stopped. Now we see our white girl approaching him. She starts asking him why he was stopped here. He saw that he was too careless now. He saw that the monster ended up entering the invincible mode, and things got worse for them. So our white girl approaches our protagonist more and more. But now she starts to remember a little more about our black one. She even thinks that she had already met him inside a raid. Already our black one turns to her, and there he ends up warning her that yes, he had already met her once already. Inside a raid, the time was that one that our protagonist devoured hers there. She ends up remembering here what he ended up devouring from her. She is surprised that our protagonist got a higher class, and she even remembers his name. His name that she remembers was the guy from the night house. Well, it was a name that left him quite surprised. But what left her surprised was that our protagonist had already evolved. But she also gets more surprised to see him alive here. But now stopping, she saw that this guy was trading his life for experience, meaning that he risked his life for experience. But after accumulating little by little experience, she wonders how he managed to be. She saw that this guy Ann was exchanging his life for experience, meaning he was risking his life for experience. But after accumulating a little bit of experience, she wondered how he managed to become as strong as he is now. He used to be shy, seeing her looking at him all the time. She saw him changing the subject, because now she didn't want to know about their pasts. She wanted to get rid of this monster, as their main goal was to defeat this creature of sleep. Here, they and the hunters groups would have to give everything they had to kill that creature. But to kill it, she would be using her ice mastery. With the help of her ice mastery, she would be able to stop that monster for a few minutes. But those minutes would be enough for our protagonist to defeat it. What the group really needed was to prepare, as they would have to deal with the monster to divert its attention, while the hunters drew the monster's attention. Our protagonist would be giving her all to defeat that monster in front of her. Our protagonist commented with them there that alone, they would never defeat these monsters. But if both joined forces to fight this dream monster, they could certainly defeat it. So, he asked her to agree to this. She then ended up saying not to worry because she was in, and soon thinking that it was just the two of them fighting these monsters, we can see that mage in the background saying she was eager to fight alongside them in this fight. Other groups also end up being motivated to want to get out of this mess. And to get out, they will have to fight this stranger until they win. And since everyone joined together to fight these things, he asks everyone to prepare, because everyone from our protagonist's group will have to end up alive to tell the story to everyone. As they prepare, the monster also prepares. That thing they have as a goal to catch ends up being completely merged within that monster. But unfortunately, they will only have 5 seconds to remove that thing from inside the monster. If by chance 5 seconds pass, they will never be able to get out of this mess. But in 30 seconds, it will be the ideal time for them to send the monster flying. So, he turns to the group and asks them to distract this monster for just 30 seconds, as the order came from our leader. Some of them don't give it much importance, but as it was to stay alive, our hunter here has an extra motivation. He wanted to get out alive from this place. So, he goes with all his speed towards this monster to attract its attention. Not only him, but also the rest. But just as he screams, he ends up also activating a new ability. His activated ability ends up increasing some things from the other groups. The fatigue spirit of our white girl increased a little, and now it's at 100%. The magic recovery speed increased by 15%. After that, she looks in another direction. Now she doesn't understand how this was possible, so she sees that she couldn't underestimate our protagonist's group, because now they will have to give everything to catch this monster here. The two point in the direction of this monster because now they wanted to catch it once and for all. The warrior, who was in pure hatred, ends up running at that speed towards the monster. As soon as he got close to the monster, he starts cursing everything at the top of his lungs. But by speaking those wonderful words to this monster, in his view, he ends up getting what he wanted, the monster's attention. The monster starts to attack, its tentacles rushing towards him. In order not to be caught, we see in the background are asking our mage to take care of the rear of our warrior. Shortly after she asks for this favor from our mage, we see her performing some kind of magic. After a minute of trying to invoke the magic, she manages to release some lights from it, and these lights speed up towards the monster in front of her. However, the monster is not caught by these lights because it ended up using its tentacles as a lure and got hit on its tentacles. Since our protagonist was observing everything that was happening, he discovers a weak point of this monster to defeat it completely. Someone in the group needed to cast a fireball at this thing, a powerful fireball to break a certain shield. Our white surprised and confused about how someone would cast this fireball because there was no one in her group with such ability. We see our protagonist preparing now. He is preparing because he will be testing a new ability. She surprises, wondering how this was possible because our protagonist at the moment wanted to be removing that plate from inside the monster manually, so she thinks that maybe he found a way to be able to grab that plate. But then he puts his hand in front of her. Our prota commits to his plan that he would be passing through the body of the dream monster, so he would be able to capture that plate. Our white completely understood the plan of our protagonist. So as a way to help our protagonist, she will attract some of the attention of that monster. So she runs up to that monster to attract his attention. But only she alone will not be able to fully attract the attention of that monster. So an archer in the background appears there. The archer from the background starts shooting at certain points. But one of the main points was to shoot up hitting the ceiling there. Our white asks him to drop some rocks that were on top of that monster a little bit, and so it is done after hitting one of the arrows in a very specific place. The rocks that were on top of the monster end up falling on top of him, and he is almost buried there is not because our white appears from the other side. She ends up taking that flag of hers again as soon as that explodes. We can see her saying that she would be freezing now. The monster will be frozen so that next our protagonist can do that damage good. But our back plan only watched those debris falling on top of that monster. But he prepared the exact moment for him to be able to run away. Thinking he runs behind, we can see our white running too. She was prepared to freeze this monster. But the monster ends up realizing the presence of the two, so the monster starts attacking our who was ahead. But those tentacles end up not catching our door. Because he managed to easily dodge after dodging completely, he ends up realizing that he managed to be injured anyway. But he has an ability that allows him to completely regenerate, and that will be helping him to be able to enter inside that monster and maybe remove that plate so they can beat this bug completely. But at this moment we see our white, who now prepares. She puts that flag on the ground, because now after doing this, we can see the floor being completely frozen. And it is the feet of that monster that was frozen. The bottom part could no longer move. Meanwhile, our door jumps up on him now over him. We see him at this moment, trying to find an easier area for him to be entering. And there he realizes he needs to be fast enough there. So he ends up activating the Fury of Speed here. 20 plus 20 speed points will be added. But he also ends up adding a toxic potion. But since he has that system there, that ends up turning any kind of poison potion into a good thing for him, he ends up gaining 15% more speed. And there he also ends up using the potion card that was useless to him just now, but at this moment could be quite useful. So our protagonist ends up adding 15% in defense and also in speed. Now our guy has everything he needs to be completely inside the monster. He needed to be going completely inside it. So at high speed, we see the monster trying to defend itself with its tentacles. The monster also finds a weak point in our hero. So with one of its tentacles, it attacks him. He realizes he ended up being discovered to avoid being caught and easily dragged up by this monster. He ends up using his arms to defend himself. The group of heroes is amazed to see that our guy managed to make him in a row. Then he is thrown back, falling to the ground. We see him saying that for the second time he failed as always. A guy who was recognized as garbage losing the fight again. Well, this was a due place for our prota, but he ends up smiling at this moment. He ends up thinking that he should do something else. So he ends up activating his recycling system behind. The system appears, and it ends up devouring our protagonist, since at this moment, our protagonist sees himself as an object to recycle, and then he ends up sort of entering into it. After being devoured, the monster remains still, his group surprised by this, trying to understand how this was possible. But minutes later after that event, we can see our protagonist coming out inside that system of his. Our PR ended up recovering some things, but at this moment the system explains that he was not something that could be recycled because he was still alive there. So that thing that was almost being recycled was to be thrown away again, and that would come back with everything for our prota. He ends up sort of using the strength of that in our big guy, allowing him to now become much stronger than he was before. And he will be using this monster now to know if our protagonist will be able to send this monster he found in front of him. Will you be able to kill? Unfortunately, we here will have to be finding out in the next part. Our hero from Aaliyah ended up sort of self-recycling and becoming much stronger than he was. So, he ends up having a little more speed, allowing him to become much faster and stronger. As soon as he self-recycles, he starts running at high speed towards the monster in front of him. After running, he simply goes through this creature. But his goal was to go through it to be able to grab that plate that was inside it. So, after rushing up to it at high speed, he manages to capture that plate, holding it firmly in his hand to prevent it from falling, right? Now that it has fallen to the ground, we see him there performing an enchantment. How did he do that? Well, he simply started reading that thing in front of him. After mentioning some kind of spell, the monster ends up being defeated, and the blood analysis was complete, which means that this mission was sort of completed in the background. So, we can see the group of our protagonist here. One of them didn't believe that everything here was over. Our little white girl also didn't understand if she won or lost, but she saw that she was alive. Minutes later, we can see the XP going to our protagonist group. Each one of our protagonist group ended up receiving some XP. The mage kind of managed to get one of strength, 6 of agility, and 16 more of intelligence. The other companion almost got the same thing. But the most different from here was our little white girl. She got something different. She even got 32 of strength. But no one lives only by strength. So for that, the system put 28 more of agility, 38 of intelligence, but also luck increased by 34. However, we've already changed places, and here we see our protagonist. He was eager to see if he would also be able to reach some level. The system ends up saying that our protagonist is at the maximum level. So seeing the system's response, he already understands what would be happening to him, and it was the most expected thing. But right after our hero realizes that, even though he didn't level up, a legendary chest appears in front of them. Everyone is surprised, but one, who then realizes that perhaps this will be the greatest treasure of their life, and would never get something like this again. So, inside that chest, some cards appeared, and those cards that emerged inside the chest began to read in a direction, but one of these directions was from our protagonist, who was in the background. There simply raised his hand, and one of these came into his hand. But what came into his hand was a sword that even the look isn't till good, because its attack level was 88, only needed a level to be able to use that sword was level 10, since our protagonist is at level 1, and maybe he has a maximum level limit. Maybe he can somehow use this sword. Soon then the system appears, and there informs our protagonist that he did not have enough requirements to be able to use this sword. So seeing that he could not be using such a good card as this, he unfortunately ends up throwing that away, and sees that it was a waste to throw this away. But as soon as he looks forward, we see then several cards on the ground, but the scene has already changed to our white one. Because, well, she appeared there near our protagonist to just deliver some things to like some good cards there, because what she would be doing was just to reciprocate what our protagonist did. Our pro, who was a little stunned, just stays quiet watching everything that was happening. But at this moment, he needed to say something to her, so he ends up calling her. So he ends up asking her a favor. But well, this favor is not told to us for now. Here, so our scene is changed again, but here it is cut out for us from the portal outside of the portal. We see several Argentines that were there waiting for a certain person. This person who was with the phone in hand ended up a team of rescuers. A strong one, not a weak one. was requested to appear. Then they saw the need to enter, but it wasn't necessary, as from inside the portal, some shadows appeared. Shortly after, those shadows started advancing in their direction. We discovered who those shadows were, our white one, along with their team. As soon as they appeared, we saw the guard, happy to see that she was completely fine. One of the journalists who was there, just waiting to see what was happening, approached the young lady to ask what was going on inside. However, upon realizing that she managed to come out without a scratch, he found out that she managed to finish that abyss alone. But then the guards approached our white one, who asked the guard to step back a bit. She then commented that this portal was too easy. So, at that moment, she bid farewell to the rest of the group, feeling a little happy but still confused. So we need to go back just a little to that moment when our protagonist wanted to talk to our white one. Our protagonist comes up with the idea that the LM group shouldn't be having money problems. Moreover, he's selling his share of the loot to her. Plus, he'd give a 50 magic crystal discount. She understands what our protagonist wanted to do, but she still couldn't grasp why our protagonist didn't want to receive all that visibility, since she managed to clean up that dungeon completely. But our hero insists, asking her to just relax, let our protagonist escape in the background, as he had something very important to do. He asks her to treat our protagonist as an extra, not to talk to him, or just pretend she never met our protagonist. She understands what our protagonist meant, so he leaves and talks about some things that needed to be discussed in the future. After our protagonist leaves, we return to real time. Here we can see our white one even more confused than before. She still doesn't understand what our protagonist was planning. She doesn't know what our protagonist wanted to do, but we do, because inside that portal, we can already see our hero. He's sitting there near the thing that our protagonist exorcised, the little creature that was fighting against him. As he sits there, our protagonist starts putting his hand towards it. After approaching, he notices some goo coming out of it. With a smile on his face, our protagonist realizes that he needs the strength of this little creature. So he simply asks if the creature doesn't want to be like an old rag for the rest of its life, or something abandoned, to give up everything and join him, join his strength. Without resistance, our protagonist calls for the system, asking it to recycle that creature's blood. After doing this, the creature is captured and sucked into his portal. After being sucked in, our protagonist unlocks some new abilities. This ability will allow our protagonist to copy another person's ability, or basically copy the other person. And if the person is strong, he'll get the same strength, but he'll only have 30 seconds to use that ability. So, things just got interesting. He feels all the power inside him now, as he's now fully powered up. Our protagonist needed to find himself in other battles, as our hero needed to get stronger and stronger. We encounter several setbacks or obstacles as he tests these new skills he's just acquired here. But scene cuts to somewhere else. Here, in an open place, we see our protagonist inside somewhere within this place. Our protagonist was taking something, but at the same time, he was looking at a system screen. Here, he was looking at his skills and attributes he had in there. But when looking at those items, that they had made the highest item requirement level, they were basically handed over to Leakin. The supervisory group didn't even dare to want to look at the equipment our protagonist had there. Well, perhaps the reason was that the equipment there on hand wasn't that good, or something like that. He even picks up those items that were there, seems to be throwing away or trying to discard those things because our protagonist saw no reason to be carrying those items in his hand. And now he even starts to think about what he would be doing with all these items here. Not even worth selling this stuff. He doesn't even know where he should be throwing this stuff away. But accidentally, our protagonist leaves the system screen open. But by leaving it open, our protagonist ends up unintentionally pressing on recycle. And from that, the hammer that was inside our protagonist's inventory ends up being recycled, and that gives our protagonist a BP point. Well, BP is a kind of thing there that will allow our protagonist to be able to pick up an extremely useless equipment. And with that too useless, our protagonist could simply be leveling that up. He can take anything from low class and simply put it there, and maybe he'll be able to recycle it. He can also be recycling materials or other things, and all that will be coming to our protagonist. Our protagonist then holds a dagger in his hand in front of it. The system gives a tutorial to our protagonist. Our protagonist should try to repair a dagger there, and he would get 5 BP points. And since he got this stuff after he fought that boss before, he ends up thinking about using that dagger then to be improved soon. So our protagonist starts to mess with the system, and there he starts to try to level up that weapon there to something better soon. Then our protagonist managed. Our protagonist sees in front of him that that dagger managed to reach the durability of 34 out of 34, and also its strength increased. The level to be able to equip that weapon in his hand was level 1, and our protagonist also not only noticed that the weapon increased its strength, but also the durability of that thing, and also its attack power increased a lot, leaving our protagonist quite happy. Because in other words, any equipment that is worn out or useless weapon could become something quite strong in the future. So it seems that the trash team needs to be able to evolve or maybe have that evolution season to get stronger and stronger. Then the system also congratulates our protagonist for completing the tutorial, so he ended up kind of getting something there. This thing he won was a kind of potion that when using that, his magical power will return to normal, or kind of returning to 100%. So our protagonist just needs to drink that, but only that currently, the attribute values are not scarce for our. What worries him the most is when the adventurers embark on the abyss. They cannot predict the extent of the abyss, and many adventurers who are not well prepared often still cannot find the boss. And in the midst of these jokes, possibly they could be not being able to have mana magical power, and therefore these magical bottles collected in the abyss are also essential and fundamental to be able to survive within that abyss. With that in hand, his magical power automatically returns to 100%. But at the moment, the system just delivered a new letter to our protagonist. Only this time, it had a drawing of something our protagonist couldn't quite grasp the reason for. However, in the next moment, it explained to our protagonist that the portion the kid had just gained was a regeneration potion that only required the use of some BP to be able to use that card. And it wasn't so surprising that this card was a regeneration card. But he didn't understand why it required a BP item. But he needed something to make that potion work effectively. So he ended up asking a boss in front of him to lend him some stuff, like some empty cups, and it was done there. So our protagonist just ended up taking those 3 cups, and then we see him trying to do some things. One of those things was trying to remove some trash that was inside. Next comes the regeneration phase. However, our protagonist also noticed that this thing above him seemed like a game, but, well, he tries to do what needed to be done. And everything he tried to do came out perfect. He didn't make a single mistake. So our protagonist managed to do what he wanted so much. But well, since he succeeded, our protagonist starts to look at it, thinking that this thing was a bit recyclable. And being recyclable wasn't a good thing to be trying to take at least this thing, but not the beaut to try. Our protagonist then kind of takes that. So by taking that thing he just did, he ends up obtaining the light magic potion 6 times. Well then, as soon as our protagonist can take that, he realizes that his magic power increased a lot. The value of fatigue decreased a little, but at this moment, he feels that his magic power increased a lot, and the fatigue he had in his body almost disappeared completely. He feels happy. But now that he saw that he managed to hack the hackers, our protagonist wants to test it in an abyss. So he ends up leaving through that door, but as soon as he leaves, we see some extras appearing. So he ends up calling for our prota. He asks if King was our protagonist. Our protagonist starts to look at these 2 guys who appeared there, and this one already comments that it's been a few days since his temperament changed. So he ended up thinking that our protagonist, this is because within the class he was being a garbage collector. And out of nowhere, he was collecting some rare items, and a few recent days he was looking for our protagonist. So as he couldn't find our protagonist, he almost reported that our protagonist was missing. But luckily he found our protagonist. Only that our hero here comments for these extras to disappear from his sight because these guys were looking for the wrong thing, since our protagonist all this time already paid all his debt he had with them. Well, these guys who are on his tail right now are those loan sharks that our protagonist borrowed that money from. Well, he managed to pay his debts, but he signed a contract with them before, and unfortunately, he'll have to act as a garbage collector. And he can't run away from his responsibility, not only because our protagonist recently unlocked a dark class, but also because he received this class. That's why he should be acting this way. He's just a garbage collector, and a garbage collector has to act in his way, and he says that. But well, this wasn't enough. So he ends up dropping from our hero's hand that cup he was holding, but only that from there had some stuff, and all of that ends up falling on the ground. But well, instead of our protagonist taking the blame, they end up taking the blame, right? Saying that our protagonist ended up bumping into a level B guy when a level 0 guy bumps into something superior. They should be acting to prevent this guy from standing out. The stronger ones always have to dominate the weaker ones. So the 2 extras get ready to catch our protagonist from behind, and at this moment, he ends up looking up. Looking up, he sees some cameras. So he ends up thinking that if he happens to do something stupid, he could get screwed because they could be using that recording there to their advantage. Right? But well, to start off right, he ends up giving our protagonist a chance to get rid of this curse. He ends up asking our protagonist to pick up those balls that were all on the ground there. Only he wouldn't pick them up from the ground. He would eat them on the ground right there. And if by chance our protagonist cleans it all up, he might let our protagonist act normally, because what he would be doing was just the job of a garbage collector. After all, this was a unique opportunity our protagonist should seize as soon as he hears this coming from his mouth. He gets irritated and simply refuses. But for having refused, he ended up getting irritated. Now he unfortunately will have to give our protagonist a punishment. But at this moment, someone appears, and he ends up getting locked up, and even starts shaking with cold. So he looks ahead. We find out who appeared there to make this guy shiver all over. This was Rodrigo, a level S guy. Moreover, he was part of an extremely respected group in this world. However, this guy who just appeared wonders why these people were gathered here. Well, he makes up the excuse saying that he didn't have much idea. Not because his main goal here was to put our protagonist in his place, but this left our little Yellow here extremely irritated, asking for this kind of person here to leave. But minutes later, he ends up turning around, but he turns towards our protagonist. Then he comments that that one there was a respected guy, a guy who was even strong. However, this bald guy here ends up saying that our protagonist was just a garbage collector. It was nothing special, but at this moment, our protagonist stops and turns towards that little yellow guy. But well, from the background, the bald guy starts saying that our protagonist was not the guy he was looking for. Possibly he got the wrong person, since our protagonist was just an extra in his view. But here, our little yellow comments there that they will be entering a certain dungeon around there. But inside, he will be fighting some fierce beasts. But the objective of entering there was why they will be entering at the moment until where the moon will be. In the red state, our protagonist, after hearing this different business there, that the moon will turn red, he already gets curious to know what will be happening there inside during the red moon. The monsters that are inside the abyss will be able to have an extremely high power gap. The extremely rare monsters may be appearing more frequently within that certain period there, where that moon will be red. Well, you also kill a monster in there, that angel that you will enter with the red moon. You have the chance to get crystals a little purer type. This crystal there in the black market would be worth the 2 wines. And our protagonist, soon hearing this, already ends up kind of hitting the desire to want to enter there inside. So he ends up joining this blonde guy. He ends up being happy, and here he is happy that our protagonist joined him. So at this moment, he would already be preparing for them to be able to enter the first portal. But at the point he talks about this, we see a guy in the background appearing. But this one who just appeared points in the direction of our protagonist. Well, he would recognize our protagonist already, so he turned as quickly as possible in the direction of the one who had just appeared. Our protagonist, of course, didn't want him to discover him. So as soon as he saw him, he simply put his hand on his face, pushing him into a darker corner nearby. As soon as they arrived in that corner, he asked him to let go of his face. And while they were struggling there, in the background, we see our blondie just observing this madness. Now that he's freed from our protagonist, we see him standing there, surprised because he saw that everything that happened in that dance wasn't an illusion. Yes, it was our protagonist. But to get rid of this guy once and for all, our protagonist just comments that if it weren't for borrowing a little bit of their strength, all of them would be dead at that moment inside that dance, and the credit should all go to our protagonist. So the blondie appears and asks if our protagonist already knew this guy. Then our protagonist tries to refute, saying that he never saw him before, but he's an acquaintance. But well, he also knew about this guy's past, the one who used the cap. He betrayed his friends, and surprisingly, this guy who betrayed almost everyone ended up kind of having a good friend. He goes his own way from there, but our protagonist begins to wonder how he managed to get out of there. Well, then he begins to explain that after betraying everyone and blaming everything on our protagonist, he did the following. He personally went to their union to try to reveal that our protagonist was guilty of it all, but it didn't work. He ended up receiving all the blame. He was going to be arrested, I don't know, for a few years, but he realized that if he stayed in jail, his life would get bad afterward. So he ended up spending all the money he had to pay a fine, and then he was free. But thanks to that, he ended up losing everything. He lost all his level, and all of this was thanks to our protagonist. Now he wanted his levels back, and if our protagonist didn't give them back, he would report our protagonist to the union. Well, our protagonist calmly, coldly there, he simply asks him to report if he wanted to try his luck. Our protagonist even gives him a chance here. He just gives him a single chance to do it. Well, he would succeed, but the rest might be history for him. But after these basic threats here, our scene is cut to another place. Here we are already inside the portal. We can see in front there a red crystal. But just below a little, we see our protagonist already there next to that guy, along with the one who wanted to report our protagonist. But as they walk a little further, they end up getting close to a group. But as soon as they get close to this group, they start asking our protagonist to reveal who he was. So he ends up introducing himself. After introducing himself, the other one also introduces himself. He was a first-class mage called Xian, but knowing that our protagonist had an extremely low class, he approaches our protagonist and comments there that it was not necessary to mock each other, because in reality, everyone has a trash class. But here they should be equal in everything, because their goal was always to make money. And within this gel, They can do it. What they need to do is unite to be able to form some creatures or farm some crystals that will be inside some monsters they will capture. But well, at this moment here, he comments that this was his band and his group, that they will be following the strongest, so maybe he was possibly the strongest. The two mages in the background didn't hesitate. They will follow this guy since at the moment he is the stronger now. But then we see our Amarillo commenting that now they needed to convey a message. This time, besides the sixth member, they now needed to make some sort of blood pact there. And currently, there's a temporarily member in their group, like an extra person with us. But well, their talk won't go forward because then he ends up taking out a key. Well, this key he showed is a key for them to be able to enter the portal, but upon entering the portal, they'll encounter several traps. However, their main objective is to find Amanda. They're managing to get through these obstacles without kicking the bucket, and whoever passes faster wins. Furthermore, if you happen to be unlucky enough to encounter a monster within this ride they're entering, your main objective isn't to stand still and try to fight it because you need to run as fast as possible since you wouldn't be able to fight against it. And now they can split up, like each one alone on their own, and whoever manages to get a certain thing that's being kept well guarded inside this ride and manages to grab it and get back out of the portal will get a prize. So the other guys who are outside are already happy because even now, they can't believe what they might possibly be winning within this mission, within this ride they're entering here. So one of them comments that there was a family, and one of those people from his family is currently starving and needs something to eat. But the other comments that he needs to reach the prize first because he also needs to take care of his wife, who is currently seriously injured, and he needs a considerable amount of money to take care of her treatments in the hospital. But, well, their objective isn't to just chat, but to enter the portal. So, they start walking toward the portal, but as soon as they're about to enter the portal, we see these two stopping to talk. One comments that a new guy appeared, like they never saw this guy there before. But the other comments that this guy who just appeared in their group was a personal friend of Amarillo Line, so he should simply keep going. But still, he wanted to stop because he saw that even entering a ride almost for the first time, our pra had a calm and tranquil face. But they enter the portal. As soon as they enter, they stop at the portal door. As soon as they stop, we see this green-haired one already talking to that one who lost everything and went to live in the abandoned house. Well, he says something for him to be careful, but he who already entered a ride knows things. But out of nowhere, these two here comment that the climate here started to get a little cold. The other comments that the temperature dropped out of nowhere. The green one starts walking, saying that the cold was getting more and more intense. But they needed to advance. But he advances, but doesn't realize his mistake. He ends up unintentionally stepping on a slab, but this slab was a trap. As soon as he steps on it, a trap starts to emerge from the ceiling. It was a big axe. Our protagonist notices, but the green one doesn't notice at this moment. So, realizing that he could get dragged up, our hero simply throws a stone at his head. This stone just pushes him. He falls to one side while that axe falls to another. As soon as he falls to the other side, he feels a little pain in his head while he stands there trying to understand what just happened. His pain gets worse and worse. But our pra is surprised at how reckless these guys are in these places here. So, they start advancing further into that ride. He keeps advancing and comments that he's very lucky. But then he starts advancing again, but he steps on another slab. But this slab is a trap. His direction starts to fly towards some types of white cocoons, but that train there wasn't even dangerous. So he ends up simply running in the direction of our pra, because he was scared. But as soon as he fell to the ground, those white things approached, and he realized that something alive was inside those white cocoons below. So he thought about what could be alive inside them, and claws of some unknown creatures appeared. What just appeared were some level 5 spiders. So then those spiders start running towards that guy with green hair. He who saw this thing approaching him gets scared and asks that unpleasant essence to let go of his foot. But that one who lost everything and went to live in the abandoned house ends up simply throwing the fireball towards those spiders to at least scare them a bit, but it didn't help. The fire didn't even scratch those things, seeing that he couldn't even hurt them, even a little bit. We see those two advancing towards those spiders because now it was their turn. They wanted to test some things on those spiders, so they approached and then sent some cuts at this spider and ended up sending some of them up. But one of them ends up escaping and starts running in one direction, only that in this direction it was towards our pra. Well, they end up sort of stopping there, and when they stop, they start looking at each other after looking a bit. This spider advances and bites our pra's foot, but our protagonist doesn't even feel the pain, he simply kicks forward. But that little kick he gave was enough for him to crush this spider. The little creature turned into powder from there, but the one who lost everything turns to our pra and is surprised by what just happened. He didn't understand how come a garbage collector had such great strength like that. He managed to crush a level 5 spider so easily, something he couldn't even hurt a spider like that. But then, out of nowhere, the system appears, commenting that our protagonist could be collecting the debris from these spiders that he crushed there to be able to make a dagger. All he had to do was recycle it, so he ends up recycling and then gaining some points. After gaining those points, he ends up then gaining a train there. But well, this thing that our protagonist just gained, he could be merging with the low-level sword. That our protagonist understands that any corpse he can find, he will be able to gain some cards. But also, he will be able to gain the creature's items too. And he could be merging it all to make a better sword. But while our protagonist was there messing with his system, we see that guy next to him commenting for this newbie to relax a bit. If he was scared, he could be returning. So then our protagonist, seeing that he could be hindering things, he ends up kind of using that thing on his sword that he had there. After using it, he ends up kind of seeing that his sword evolved. Now, his sword that was a common sword became an extremely stolen dagger. But well, while our prey held that better dagger in the world, in the background, we see the green guy running from this spider, but he stops right. He got tired of running from this thing. Now, he wants to fight against this spider. So he ends up putting on a mask. With that mask in his mouth, he ends up feeling much stronger. So after feeling stronger, he ends up dodging because this sand ended up simply cutting in his direction and almost caught him. But he ended up dodging. But well, he ended up awakening a somewhat useless class. Until good or until useless. Even his ability is simple. He needed to sing. When he sings, he will be able to buff some of his things. So he ends up taking out the microphone. And now it asks that this monster relax, because things will get pretty bad for him. It will be showing its greatest potential here now. So he starts singing. Well, they sing something there that's not good. No, man, the guy sings too badly in the background. Then we see our protagonist who just watches his singing from there while that little creature that was around there just gets more and more irritated. But, well, man, listening to his bad singing from there, he ends up getting extremely annoyed. The monster activated the new form, and now he wanted to already be going after that little green one there. And our little green one, seeing that he failed, he ends up running. But it didn't help that Spider was much faster than the Virgin. He just looks back and sees those claws of that thing there approaching him. He then sees that thing jumping on him to grab him completely. Only at this moment, we see our protagonist, who our protagonist at this moment will not be allowing that weak spider here to catch our hero. Thus, with that style of our deep web dream, along with the deep web dagger, our protagonist begins to deal with this monster. But his goal was not just to kill these little monsters. No, our protagonist wants to find the boss to be able to grab the boss for himself. Continuing the story from the last chapter, even with our big guy activating the Sue mode of the THP web, he couldn't stop all the monsters. At that beautiful moment, the monsters had a basic strengthening, and because of that, became stronger. Those two there, who had a heavy family to wake up, stayed prepared to act in the rear guard, since they were now much more potent than before. However, we see that guy who lost everything and went to live in the abandoned house. At this moment, he prepares to launch an attack on the monster running towards those two figures. He ends up using some fireballs. But at this point, our hero passes by the guy who lost everything and went to live in the abandoned house. Well, our hero doesn't pass at a slow speed, but at high speed. The guy doesn't even see his shadow. What he really saw were those spider monsters, which startled him at that moment. However, those claws that were about to grab the guy who lost everything and went to live in an abandoned house are suddenly cut out of nowhere and hang there, floating. Minutes later, they fall. The monsters then also fall, and some of them end up being sliced. Not just some, but several that unfortunately had their bodies split in half. After this Tramontina that our hero passed through these spider monsters, we see him landing behind the two extras in a superhero pose. After landing in the superhero pose, suddenly, we see the two extras looking at each other. At that moment, they ask what just happened, as they barely saw what went on right in front of them. Our hero went up and down with the knife and managed to send some monsters away. They then suspect that our big guy might possibly have a secret class. But our big guy just starts thinking about other things. The demonized spiders have a gigantic resistance to poison. And what does that mean? Well, I don't know much. But I do know that poison doesn't work against these spiders. It's also not surprising, since one of the most potent poisons in our hero's world is extracted from these spiders that our big guy ended up sending away. However, if you use these things to your advantage, you will have a better chance of fighting these same spiders. It's like using poison against the poisoner. But you won't be able to defeat a spider just by using its own poison. You'll need some knife skills to take them down. While our hero is amazed by the potency of these spiders' venom, We see the two in the background still believing in the potency of the barbarians who faced the spiders and defeated them easily. Well, these guys think that the one who defeated the spiders was our top-notch singer. He even believes it was him, but upon thinking, he realizes it wasn't. He just used some small buffs, but it wasn't enough to send the monsters to their graves or anything like that. While that guy was receiving all the credit from our protagonist, from another place we see our big guy commenting on a few things. The abyss monsters have a small intelligence to distinguish their target as enemy or ally. And what will this change in the battlefield? Many things. This ability allows them to choose whom to attack and whom not to attack. At that moment, our hero stops to look a little closer. Looking closely, he realizes that they will use the same strategy. Run and counterattack at the same time. Our hero then heads in that direction, while our big guy stands still, thinking about a few things. Hinking about it, we see this guy here commenting that the monsters suddenly decided to run and retreat. This was just one of the first 4 floors, and there was still a lot to explore. But at the moment, our PR didn't want to imagine what might appear a little later. He could be discovering new things then. He wondered if he should spend the things he was earning by killing those monstrous spiders. But he decided not to spend them. Instead, he converted them into some points. And in the end, our protagonist ended up accumulating 27 points in his system to distribute to his stats. But he thinks about keeping a card as a kind of space, and decides to convert the remaining 27 points into BP points, which ultimately gives our protagonist 54 BP points. Our PR could use these points for many things, but the scene shifts to another direction, with those extras commenting that the monsters suddenly decided to run away. They intended to run from this place so they could move up to the next floor. So he lights a torch, and being the group's leader, asks everyone in his group to gather in one corner so they can move forward together, aiming to go as deep as possible into this dungeon. The group follows, since they had no intention of retreating. And besides, our hero thinks he won't trigger any more traps since he was easily defeating all the monsters. At least, that's what he thought. Our PR thinks he will be up to a lot at the moment, so he considers following them, but he feels lazy. However, looking to the side, he notices something strange. A portal appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the cave they were entering. This was a secret area that he could explore alone if he wanted to, but due to the influence of the red moon, he needed to be more careful since his team was quite weak at the moment. So, he decides to explore the dungeon while also being cautious. He ends up summoning a blood nightmare, that little thing our hero dealt with last season, and since it literally copied the person in front of it, our protagonist appears in front of himself. Before heading on his adventure, he asks his clone to follow the group and not lose sight of them. The clone understands and follows the group. Moving forward, we see the 10/10th singer asking what was happening since he wasn't following, but the clone is the one following. Moving ahead, he shouts for him not to fall behind because if he did, they wouldn't know how he died. Meanwhile, as he was saying this, we see the portal a bit closer. Inside the portal, we see our hero who has already entered. Upon entering, he finds himself in a gigantic cave, but it was empty, like a huge moss-covered area. There's not much moss here. Suddenly, behind our hero, a spider appears, ready to catch him. The spider jumps on him, but he's too quick. He turns around and sees the spider. To avoid getting caught by it, our hero simply jumps to the side while the spider crashes face first into the ground. Jumping to the side, we see him. Crawling to the side, however, that spider ended up kind of standing up again, and it stays in position not to counterattack our big guy already. And it didn't take long for it to launch a swipe at our guy, but he was too fast, easily dodging that attack. At this point, its claw was stuck in the ground, and this was a more than ideal moment for him to attack this spider. He ends up launching several slashes at that claw that was stuck in the ground. After those slashes completely disappeared, our big guy is quite surprised. The reason was that our protagonist couldn't even scratch that spider's claw. The thing was tough, and at this point, he understood that its physical defense had become almost completely immune to our protagonist's attacks. He could attack that thing all he wanted, but no matter how much he tried, the spider would not take any damage. At this point, the spider counterattacks our protagonist. To avoid being caught off guard, he kind of jumps back using his arm as a shield. But that wasn't enough because the claw ended up scraping our big guy a little, and he is thrown against the wall with full force. He ends up being flattened against the wall. In that moment, our protagonist activates his skill. His skill allows him to see the level of this monster to determine if he could perhaps kill this spider. Its name is Aninhada, level 20, and it was a rare level. Our guy is paralyzed and doesn't even see what he could do against those powerful claws in front of him. He was surprised, but at the same time happy, because now in front of him appeared a unique opportunity in his life. Since a rare elite monster appeared, he could kill it and then steal its levels to apply to himself. But to defeat it, he would have to overcome the spider. The spider doesn't relent and ends up spitting some kind of spider web in his direction. But the spider webs don't hit him, they simply land on the ground. Our protagonist jumps to the side and easily dodges those web attacks. Jumping to the side, our protagonist sets a little fire in his hand. With that little fire in his hand, our protagonist jumps on top of that spider. From above the spider, he stretches his hand down, and after stretching his hand down, he ends up shouting the name of his skill. After shouting the name of this skill, an explosion happens right below the spider. The spider is hit directly, but even so, it wasn't defeated. It became much angrier with our protagonist. Now it was faster and fiercer. It throws spider webs at our protagonist, but our hero wasn't dumb. He managed to dodge them. The spider then starts to counterattack our protagonist with several attacks, but even that wasn't enough to capture our hero. Running from there, our big guy ended up discovering some things about this spider he was fighting. It had extremely high resistance and immunity to fire. So in the end, our protagonist discovered that he couldn't use his attributes to his advantage there. In this case, our protagonist would use other things. He approaches that spider, which was spitting webs in his direction but missing easily. But there, he wouldn't be using weak powers to kill this spider. He would be using his dagger, the Sung's dagger. He then approaches the spider, holds it firmly in his hand, and then prepares to launch that attack in the direction of the spider, while it was spitting some webs, and at the same time watching our dear hero next to it with the unknown dagger near its face, as he gets closer than ever. Near this monster, our protagonist lands a critical hit on the creature, and here he ended up slicing the monster with some blades, causing a few minor critical hits. The monster simply jumps in pain, and our protagonist lands on the ground. However, on the ground, our protagonist is happy to know that some level 5 spiders had a massive defense against poison. In contrast, this level 20 Brood Queen's poison resistance was extremely low. Even a tiny bit of poison could bring down a monster like this one. Our protagonist is surprised that what was created by her offspring became her weakness here in the game. Our protagonist begins to realize that the reason this spider had a significant weakness to any poison was simply because this boss spider had changed its way of living. She used to hunt, but she abandoned her title and left it to her children to handle. She simply stayed in her brood while being fed. But the most ironic part of the story was that our protagonist used the same poison that her offspring produced, and that poison was taking down the queen herself. From one point of view, this was quite sad, but for our protagonist, it wasn't so sad. At this moment, the spider began to get irritated with our protagonist and started to prepare some webs to throw in his direction. Our protagonist is surprised, eyes wide, as he sees those spider webs approaching him. Normally, he would be able to dodge this attack, but the spider was clever. She spun her body, causing the webs to follow him in the direction he was trying to escape. In the end, our protagonist was captured by the spider. He was immobilized and couldn't move a muscle. The spider approached our protagonist, thinking he was finally defeated, but what she didn't expect was that our protagonist had that instinct from his Dungeons and Dragons experience that he wouldn't be easily defeated. So, he activated his berserker ability. His eyes disappeared, and he became furious. With this, he managed to free himself easily from the spider webs that were holding him. Once freed, our protagonist planted his foot on the ground, and with a forceful push, he launched himself towards the spider. The spider, seeing our protagonist approaching, didn't move because she thought his punch would still be very weak. But this was her biggest mistake, as our protagonist managed to land a full punch on the spider. This time, it wasn't just an ordinary punch. He managed to crack the spider's carapace. He not only cracked it, but managed to pierce the spider with a single punch. Thus, our hero easily finished this battle against the boss spider. As soon as the boss spider was defeated, the system appeared, delivering some rewards to our protagonist. One of them was a new ability called Berserk Mode, which significantly boosts our protagonist's attributes. He would be able to avoid any type of attack, even if someone had high resistance. Our protagonist could ignore that resistance and be nearly immortal in a fight. However, there was a downside. If he used this ability, his health would gradually drain until he died, or until the duration ended. Most people would choose a better and more reasonable class, one that wouldn't lead to their death. So, our protagonist begins to think hard about whether he should choose this ability, knowing he would face many more monsters. Strong and extremely high resistance is the proof here. That monster our protagonist just killed. So, if he chooses the option of Star Ping, our protagonist will undoubtedly be able to strengthen his basic, but his health will be drained, and this was a side effect he didn't like. He could choose this class, allowing our protagonist to have broad advantages on a battlefield. This would even be advantageous for our hero. Our protagonist doesn't think much, he simply chooses. Now that he chose Star Ping, with these two small axes here, our protagonist will be able to harm those with strong resistance. If someone has extremely high resistance, our hero could easily overpower his opponent. Yes, he is suffering a lot, but since he chose these two small axes, several cards appear in front of our hero. These cards were the reward he got after killing the spider, but here he ends up choosing this card here. Upon taking a closer look at this card, he realizes it's actually quite good. If our MC takes it to the surface, he could sell it for a high amount of money. He could sell it for 15,000 or so, and the advantage would be obvious to our hero. Oh well, he simply then thinks of recycling some of those cards, because our protagonist only had one option, sell one, and the rest he could use himself. So then those things exit the system and move toward the items on the ground. While our big boy was devouring everything that creature on the ground had, we see him wondering what kind of ability he would gain by fully training this creature beneath him. So, when he manages to fully train that monster below, he gets a new card. This was the Nyata Mother card he just obtained. This card our protagonist unlocked was a card where he could summon 4 demonized Nyatas to fight by his side, and its evolution also depends on combat experience. The more he fights, the better the character of our protagonist becomes. But our big boy is already happy about one thing, because he saw that this monster can choose its own evolution, something our protagonist had never seen in one of the monsters. But while he was surprised, the scene here is cut again. Well, it's cut to another direction, but we then see that guy there, the same one who is part of our protagonist's team. He is happy and sad at the same time, because they least expected to maybe find a mine in the middle of the abyss. The other then suddenly starts commenting that to make the situation better or worse, they are in the time of the red full moon, which means that the crystals right in front of them are of extremely high rank, and they could sell these crystals they found here for quite a high price on the black market. And the same one even agrees because, in the market, this thing here would be worth a fortune. But suddenly, an extra pulls out a sword, and this sword he just pulled out could totally wreck the place where they are. But that guy who lost everything, went to live in the abandoned house, simply grabs him by the collar and yells for him to stop being stupid. The money they could get from these crystals here could allow them to live their entire lives without ever needing to work again. And he ends up thinking that handing all this over to the government was the last thing he wanted to happen. But to make the situation worse, he comments right there that they wanted to take the money for themselves, just in case the government found out, and it was very likely that they would hunt the guys down. They would take everything from them, and in the end, they would discover this cave. And maybe in the end, they would discover everything and take everything for themselves. After all, this is a kind of teamwork. Their goal is to capture everything here and deliver half to the government. Well, that's what they thought. We see this guy who lost everything, who went to live in the abandoned house, simply start grinding his teeth because he sees that these guys who were part of his team were a bit stupid. He ends up thinking that these idiots weren't worth anything. And moreover, since they are inside a cave, why not take these fools and throw them into a trap to be devoured by some monsters there? In the end, he could keep all the money since he didn't care about this money at the moment, as he wanted to share it with the government. So, he wouldn't mind kicking the bucket here. But at this moment, he stops, and there his eyes start to open a little. Near his face, a little sweat starts to come out, and then we realize that our protagonist ends up devouring him in the end. Well, all that just happened were his thoughts, but this would really happen to him if he did something stupid here with this group of extras. If he did something wrong since our PR was right there next to him. Besides, he had no level left, and he then thinks of something. He wanted to gather money and get some cash in any way, so he looks at a crystal that was right there beside him, and even thinks about taking it, since by getting that in hand, he could buy some high-quality equipment in the end. And that would already change his life a lot. So, he approaches one of the crystals that was there. As he got closer, he ends up grabbing it. Then he thinks he should get some parachutes, since he had gone through all the trouble of coming down to this place. However, he ends up kind of triggering a trap, and a trap gets triggered. A beam of light comes from the bottom. The group of our protagonists stops, but a beam of light goes through the two of them, passing between them. However, this thing ends up hitting a guy from his team. This guy got hit. It filled his face, and the creature immediately fell to the ground. As it fell, we see the one who lost everything wondering what the hell that was. But while he tried to figure out what it was, we return to that portal. At that portal, we can see that thing our protagonist just got from the system. Then our protagonist realizes that it was level 1. But even at level 1, it was enough for our protagonist to evolve a lot, since this little creature was strong. However, the system comments there that our protagonist could level up that little creature below by making it grow just using those BPD points. But for that thing to be able to fight on the battlefield and at least survive, it needed to be at level 5. He comments that he wanted to put that thing in a battlefield as quickly as possible. He wanted to leave that thing fighting in front of him since he couldn't use many of his abilities. So at this point, he thinks about using some points to level it up. As he talks about this, we see the happiness of our little creature. Then our protagonist ends up giving our little creature some DPP points, eventually leveling it up. Now it was the silk spider, thus becoming an apprentice. Our protagonist needed to make it stronger. Story continues after our protagonist unlocks that new pet for him, but then cuts to another place. Here we are shown the group of our prota. We see that guy who lost everything. Looking at his companions, one of them was lying on the ground, Lazul. This one there screams the name of his companion after screaming. We see in the background our guy, who lost everything. But he says that what just happened was a small accident. But this, in the other's view, was not his face. Was already irritated. Then he turns towards the guy who lost everything and grabs his collar. He gets angry for seeing that his companion died, and this was all because of his greed. He was a guy who gave everything of himself to be helping his family. Now that he's gone, it's very likely that everything now for him will be quite bad. But all this was because of this guy, because he ended up providing them with some really bad luck. But this guy who lost everything gets angry with them because he is getting a scolding, but he comments that it was nothing like that. No, because he just wanted to be getting money everyone wanted. But what he really wanted was to get rid of this group of his, because he saw that this group of his were just some guys who were getting in the way of his plans. So then he raises the knife and comments that he will now have his beautiful end here. The guy puts some fire in his hand to try some things there. But one interrupts him, saying that it was not worth messing with this thing, that since he had already lost so much, it was no use fighting anymore. At this point, he tried to do something already with them. But at this moment, an unknown shadow ends up, entering the cave where they were. But he, upon entering, starts clapping. He comments there that he had good taste. His vision of wanting to just get money was a vision. Even good. Then he even invites this guy there, who has good taste, to his guild. There was always more space for one person. Then his companion already approaches his boss and comments that down there, the pet's body was still warm, and it was still worth recovering. Some things besides accepting this guy in his team would be too much of a hindrance. The guy only thinks about money. But the blonde guy turns to him with some weird talks. One of those weird talks was about someone there who would always go inside the Angel Dan, but his goal always in an Angel AD was to fight to the death to get in the end money. With money you live life, and he had good taste money to live life beautiful. But what he was doing here, maybe it was not something to do, since at the moment they were capturing crystals that only appear once a year. That happens when there is a red moon. And then he pulls that guy who lost everything close to him, and he starts with new talks. New talk was the following: to be able to capture a crystal like that, it was necessary to have something in return. Something quite powerful, or something quite humble for yourself. If you take a crystal, something of yours will be taken away, or in a more explained and simpler way, death. Thus we can observe a gigantic armor approaching near them. They end up being surrounded along with our protagonist. They see the situation that they will have to be fighting against these creatures. Since at the moment, they give some options to our protagonist and his group. The option was to just stay there collecting the crystals. If they collect nicely, they will let them. Lively kids, but on the contrary, if they want to be running, they will basically be some dead meat. But one of the guys who was in our group turns to these extras and says that these crystals they are going to get are basically some crystals that have a trap. You can pick a crystal that will give you a very good life, or you can pick a crystal that will give you a very good sadness. Well, this sadness is to die right there. But the blonde guy, much more than prepared, raises another point. He was needing money since his wife was quite sick, and this was not even an option. He needed to get this money anyway. And then getting closer every minute to them, he still comments with the new chat that it was also not shameful to die for money. He also previously mentioned that he would be giving his life to be able to earn enough money to change the life of this guy's family. And as said with a word, he tries to turn around where right there behind him were some crystals. What was needed was to get closer to pick some of those. So he does. He ends up getting closer. Little by little, everyone behind there keeps watching him. He extends his hand a little trembling, but he extends to pick a crystal that was there, but he can't. He turns to the group of extras right behind him. After turning, he ends up apologizing since he didn't come here just to get money to help his wife. He just came here to get enough money to pay off some debts of his. The kid even cries. But our blonde guy who was there with high expectations over this extra, he finds himself in a situation where he needed some new person. Some crazy one who would be without life, going to pick those crystals that were there in the background. We see that guy who lost everything. He comments that he would not be a match to fall into a fight against this blonde guy. He still thinks of some ways to get rid of him. He then looks in his direction and starts to think for a good while, thinking he ends up kind of calling for him after calling. He says that just now his guild was needing someone to join their group. He proposes to join his group already. As soon as he says he wanted to join his group, we see a masked guy approaching near his leader. He calls for him, he who already knew the things he asked for. This guy who lost everything in life to get a little closer to him. He then does this. After getting closer, he kneels down like this. He makes a kind of oath that he would follow him for the rest of his life. But at the moment he completes this sentence, then the guy, our blonde guy, simply kicks the guy's chin, making the guy fly a little backwards. After that, he says there that he will not let people like this guy who lost everything in life join his group. He would be a kind of stone in his way that would get in his way, since he was a guy who was willing to make his group die for him, since he himself would let everyone die to be able to stand out over the others. Then he screams there that he will let him die there. Since behind there was a necromancer who was our protagonist, he asks for the necromancer to control this guy right away, so that he could be collecting the crystals peacefully, and the money would all be our blondie's soon. In the background, we can observe something happening. Our protagonist ended up switching places with that little creature that summoned him before. Right after switching places, he understands the situation. This guy here, who was thinking about approaching to get rid of that blondie, is stopped by our protagonist. Our protagonist asks him not to be so harsh, so he couldn't get too close to that guy, or even try to make some gaps. At that moment, he asks to let him handle things, and asks him to stay back since things from then on would get a little more dangerous. But collecting crystals for our protagonist was the most normal thing, so he would be collecting. At the moment he says he would be collecting the crystals, we see that unknown guy approaching near our pro, preventing them from moving forward. He asks that this trash not get so close to these crystals since our protagonist, in his view, was a failure. But our protagonist just puts his hand on a crystal nearby. As soon as he puts his hand on that crystal, he pulls it up, making that masked guy there run in another direction. He jumps right behind other crystals to protect himself since he doesn't know what might be happening. Hidden for a while, they get up. Then he tries to see if something happened to our pro, but he sees that our boy wasn't entirely well. Even if those traps were active, our protagonist wouldn't be injured here, but the most that could happen is he gets slightly hurt. Not much would happen to him, and the reason for not taking much damage was because our protagonist was very lucky. Our pro's luck reached a limit, the limit where the damage wouldn't be much on our protagonist. The whole group is hidden behind. We see the blondie there. He gets up and brings news to our pro, commenting that the traps were not activated. Then he sees that for that trap he was picking up to not be activated, it was necessary for the person to have 60 luck, which means our protagonist was a very lucky guy. But that unknown masked guy sneaks up and comments that our protagonist is a level 1 gravedigger, but he doesn't understand since to change jobs you don't have that much luck to get 60 points in luck. Even if you change jobs, you don't get that much luck. So there's only one possibility that the traps he was picking up there were faulty. So the orange-haired guy in the blondie's group approaches one of the crystals there. Seeing that our pro managed to pick up 2 crystals and the trap wasn't activated, he ends up grabbing one of the crystals there, but as soon as he grabs it, he comments to that masked guy that nothing happened. But in the background, a light appears. That light that was shining in the background. It didn't take long. Soon it approaches the orange-haired guy's head, and he is hit squarely. Right after that, he falls. And then the masked guy approaches to see if he was okay. And then after the blondie notices everything that happened, he points out that our protagonist, inside the dungeon, our protagonist was at the forefront of everyone, since at the moment, he has a very high luck level, which means our protagonist put all the points he gained into luck. He doesn't understand why he did this, but soon after, he turns to our pro and asks if he really did this crazy thing since he could have been increasing his strength or something like that. However, our protagonist simply tells him straight to his face that he distributed the points among his statuses. He didn't put everything into just one. Upon hearing this, he gives a macabre smile, but then says that he will be changing his plan because his initial plan was just to make everyone here kick the bucket, so he could use their corpses to control and collect the crystals. But seeing that our pro has a lot of luck in his statuses, he will be making our protagonist his main monster corpse. And after our Liren manages to capture all the crystals here in this abyss where they entered, he will easily get rid of the bodies of the people he used to his advantage. And after everything they went through there, right after they entered this dungeon, they find themselves in front of those extras who were there before, preventing them from escaping this place. But now this one comments on how they would manage to fight these new opponents since they are qualified members of the Blood Watch. They wonder how they would be getting rid of the one in the back who sang well, and ends up asking him to run along with them, as there was still time for them to escape. While they were thinking about what to do to escape, we see the one who lost everything observing the scene. He was trembling with fear, but he doesn't think much. He starts running in a direction which was towards the exit. And while that one was running to a safer place, we see our protagonist turning in his direction and wondering why that guy was running since they were in a good number. However, the other one, who until now was thinking about what to do, comments that now they were at a disadvantage since they were missing one person in their team. And our protagonist quickly interrupts what he was about to say, as at the moment he says they were not at a disadvantage at all, since they were enough to face some people. While our protagonist was talking about his new opponents, the unknown masked man starts hearing some noises coming from the back. He asks his companion, who then also starts hearing those strange noises. But this unknown masked man starts looking up. When looking up, he sees a type of mutant flea, and these mutant fleas start running towards them. But while those mutant fleas were running towards the hunters, a system screen appears above, and it was basically a summoning by someone from our protagonist. After a while, those mutant fleas stay in front of those hunters. They stay for a good while staring at them, and while those spiders were staring at those new opponents, we can observe in the background that guy. That sings well there. He saw now that he was more screwed than ever, since there were some quite strong opponents. Now these mutant spiders appear turning to our black one. Our protagonist comments that it wasn't so much like that since these spiders were on his side. He, surprised, asks if Menon couldn't control the spider, already totally ignoring his question. Our protagonist widens his eyes, and by widening these eyes, he ends up activating his skill. This skill will allow our protagonist to look at his statistics. When activating it, he manages to see the statistics of this unknown masked guy. He was a level 20 necromancer, but also right below was a level 17 berserker, and a little further down were two hunters who were just observing in the background, but both were level. But after that was the paladin, who also had a reasonable attack level. Our protagonist, right after observing their levels, thinks that the fight from now on won't be so difficult. He thinks he could be winning this so easily. But the problem wasn't these little monsters, but the other one. He couldn't kind of see the statistics of this blonde guy, since at the moment the system comments that this guy here was basically at the same level as our protagonist, or a level quite similar to his. While our protagonist was there looking at his statistics, we see the blonde guy commenting that our protagonist is a very surprising person, since he could be controlling monsters. He was a good guy to join his team, but our protagonist, on the contrary, was already thinking of methods to be defeating this blonde guy, since he thinks that maybe he is not at his level, but rather a superior level. But he won't have difficulty to win. Perhaps this thing in a 1v1. But after a good wait, the blonde guy ends up shouting for his group to take care of these monsters, since if they weren't level 10, they wouldn't have difficulty for their hunters, since they would easily defeat them. But there, he asks them to be careful, since in the fight there, they couldn't be harming those crystals. The crystals were a gold stone, and they didn't want to lose that. So he gives an announcement so that they could counterattack our protagonist and his monsters. We see him there changing plans. He asks his group to run in the same direction where that guy who lost everything and went to live in the abandoned house ran. But that one who had a heavy family to take care of was in a situation that our protagonist will again be there protecting them. He didn't want to be left behind. But looking ahead, he realizes that the monsters were very strong. So he simply turns back and then starts running in another direction. That one who sings 10-10 also stands still waiting for his moment. But then he turns to our protagonist. But as soon as he turns to our protagonist comes with some talks, saying that he still had many goals to complete in life. And one of these is to explore more abysses. And if he didn't want to kick the bucket or die here, it was simply running in another direction to survive. So our singer 10-10 turns for the last time to our protagonist. Then he runs. But before running, he comments there that he will never be forgetting the sacrifice that our protagonist gave them, something so they could escape. As he talks about it, he starts running towards that cave to escape. However, as he steps on some kind of thing on the ground starts to shake. He ends up activating another sort of trap, and then the wall that was near them suddenly starts to collapse. It seems to collapse on top of them, and the one who had a heavy family to take care of turns around and looks like a singer, asking what he did. He apologizes and starts to explain some things. When he entered this cave, he had terrible luck, and until now, he never had any luck in this dungeon since he was always activating the traps. And now, as before, it was no different. He activated some traps. The scene then cuts to our blonde group's side, where we see the paladin running toward those arenas. As they get a little closer, we see a surprised spider, but it doesn't stay surprised for long because it gets a direct hit from the paladin's hammer. After hitting the mutant spider on the head, the paladin is surprised because even though he gave a powerful blow, it wasn't enough to finish off this creature. To kill this mutant spider, he will have to keep hammering its face multiple times. The spider turns towards him and spits a white liquid that sticks to the face of the character. He tries to remove it, but it starts turning into a type of spider web that blinds him partially. Surprised by this, he opens one of his eyes and sees someone in front of him. That someone is our protagonist, who appeared suddenly while he was trying to remove the web from his face. We see him pulling out his shield, which was enough to defend against our protagonist. But then, at level 19, he starts to count his victories, asking our protagonist to give up, since here in a fight it was only him, and he was just the weakest of all. Soon after realizing this, he ends up pulling his shield back, making our protagonist then be thrown a little upwards. Still flying upwards, our protagonist comments that his level 10 spiders were good enough to be dealing a little with this hunter here. But those spiders won't be enough to beat them, since he is currently dealing with a problematic attack group. Right after commenting on this, our protagonist jumps back while trying to land a hit on this guy from there. But this hit was enough to grab his feet, and what he wanted ended up happening there. Our door stays behind while thinking about his next move. After thinking for a bit, he jumps at high speed trying to grab that hunter who was there. He would defeat him, but at that moment, 2 arrows fly towards our protagonist, and he, seeing those arrows approaching, then looks to the side. Then, looking to the side, he notices those arrows approaching, allowing him to dodge those arrows. Right after dodging, we see those there preparing another arrow to try their luck. But by dodging that arrow, he thinks our protagonist got lucky, but this time he won't be lucky again because here then, he prepares another arrow. After preparing his arrow, he shot in the direction of our protagonist. After shooting, we see our protagonist preparing his machete. After preparing, he simply sees that arrow approaching slowly near him, and with just one cut, he splits it in half. He couldn't believe it. He managed to intercept his arrow at high speed, but our protagonist there, running a bit backward, ends up activating another ability of his. This was the Great Explosion. Soon from the ground, some fires emerge, and these fires go towards those 2 archer arrows. They see these fires appearing near them, and do nothing. Doing nothing, an explosion happens there, sending the 2 into the air. Did he manage to defeat the 2? He didn't, because they were very smart and tough. They managed to escape that explosion from our protagonist. But giving up, he still hasn't given up. He prepares another blow again, but to find out if our protagonist will be able to crush these 2 archer arrows and the group of that blonde guy in that famous 1v1, we'll have to find out in another next part.
The story from here will continue in the next chapter from the same place as before, just a bit further ahead. We observe those armored guys. Here was the tank. The tank here ends up shouting for this monster below him to die already. He lowers his spiked club with all his might to the ground, hitting the monster squarely and splitting it in half. But the enemy tank starts looking at them coldly. After looking for a bit longer, he begins to run at a good speed towards the group of our protagonist. In his left hand, he wielded his machete to deal with them. But our allied tank asks him to fall back since he hadn't attacked yet and there was nothing more he could do. The tank, realizing it was too late, approaches the enemy tank. He uses his shield, and with that shield used, he manages to easily defend against that giant machete that tried to hit him. The shield ended up deflecting that thing a bit to the side. All this was happening because of that boy. That brat who was messing everything up. But if you, boy, didn't want to die, you needed to get up. Your help was necessary in the fight. But at the moment he gets distracted for a few minutes, the enemy tank appears from behind, trying to launch a new attack in his direction. Not noticing, he quickly turns towards the tank and again uses his shield. But now the attack from that enemy tank was a bit more potent than usual. The shield ends up almost splitting in half, but he still managed to defend a little, though it wasn't enough. He ends up being thrown slightly backward. He ends up hitting the rocks a bit, some blood coming out of his mouth, and with each passing minute, he becomes more and more unconscious. His sword falls near our singer, and after observing his sword, Kano near him, he turns his gaze in another direction, towards the tank that was watching the other approaching enemy tank. But our allied tank would not lose easily. He then quickly gets up and now starts to laugh in the face of danger. But well, he should never have come to the abyss here. And now he is all messed up and should die anyway. So since he will die anyway and thinks a lot that debts are basically cleared after death, the question that won't shut up is, who would collect from someone who died? He then would fight with all he had. Now he would die, but would also take someone along with him. At that moment, he asks for this tank in front of him to come at him with everything to kill him, with a somewhat sarcastic look on his face, looking towards our allied tank. Then he starts preparing to attack our tank, putting his giant knife behind him. He ends up holding it in a different way now. He holds a bit more power within himself to be able to deliver a stronger attack. Well, this will certainly be his end. And now, there will be no more way to defend against anything. But at that moment, a slightly purple aura ends up wrapping around him, and he can no longer move at that moment. He then turns in the other direction. In the direction of that singer then, he was there singing towards him. At that moment, he ends up using the song where he can apply a debuff which means that he won't be able to move for a few minutes. Our 10-10 singer used an immobilization technique on Liaxin, and now he asks his companion to finish this fight quickly, but the same asks for that idiot to let him go since he also ended up kind of paralyzing his companion and he has nothing more to do. But at this deep moment, we see our protagonist wondering what was going on back there. He didn't understand anything that was happening. But from up ahead appears a mage. Even if you have some hidden and quite powerful skills, basically there is a limit to everything, and your powers will not be able to support your battle sooner or later. And certainly the strongest mage in the group will be ending our protagonist. But the ability he used to summon monsters ended up consuming a lot of his mana, which means he doesn't have much mana there to use. And he also used his clone, which consumed a lot of his mana. So, not understanding what was happening anymore, he ends up pulling from his system a glass of mysterious water, or rather, baptized water. The protagonist takes his straw and ends up drinking a little sip, and while that mysterious mage wonders what kind of drink that was, it doesn't help anymore to drink anything or whatever he wants, because his end was decided the moment he entered the battlefield. The most powerful mage will be ending our protagonist in the blink of an eye. At this moment, he has a unique ability. This was the Necromancer's ability, an S-rank ability so powerful that no one in the world can defeat him. Even if his opponent or monster is totally torn apart, he can revive that thing, and that thing will be fighting with full force. The monster controlled by his necromancy will not basically give a step back, and his small toys are not basically easy to dismantle. Our protagonist, drinking his last glass of baptized water, basically understands what was happening, and it was very understandable that now his mana ended up kind of flowing back into him, which means that he has all his previous mana now. He then summons those recycling hands, and the dead should rest in peace. And what he will be doing here now is just doing the basics. He then asks that mysterious hand to suck those corpses from the necromancer there. Thus, it is done. Those mysterious hands go towards the corpses of the creatures, and they are sucked into our protagonist. Now that everything was totally taken into his dimension, the surprised mage wonders where his corpses went and what kind of ability our protagonist used. But he doesn't have much time to stand there thinking about life, because at this beautiful moment, our protagonist ends up making a small jump. But the jump was enough for him to reach his opponent's face. Hitting his face, he manages to perfectly land a more than beautiful punch on his face. Hitting the mark, he is thrown back a bit, falling in front of that guy there, our Blondie. However, our Blondie at this moment was there grabbing one of those summons from our protagonist from before. But that summoning wasn't much for this Blondie, as the Blondie with one hand made that summoning tremble. Yet with a small movement, he explodes the stump of that monster. But here it wasn't surprising, since those tricks of our protagonist were to be admired. That caught his attention a lot before, and it was no different now. But here, people a little less capable of having a good life come into the dungeon to get money, to have a better chance of having good cash to live on. But these people enter the dungeon 100% well. However, people like these always end the lives of these new players or hunters. But people like these who treat human beings like dogs or pets shouldn't basically have the right to be alive there in front of our protagonist. But this caught more than his attention. Even demonstrating his power, he was still against his will. Poor people should follow his orders, and they are his subordinates, so he can do whatever he wants. And now he will also show a bit of his power to our protagonist. But before he can complete his speech, he ends up looking to the side, because there, one of the guys ends up begging not to be killed, because he just didn't do anything. He just tried to defend himself. He was that guy there who was trying to stand up to that enemy tank of his. But at this moment, our Blondie ends up making a proposal. He basically proposes for this 10-10 singer to follow the Blondie to escape this dungeon. But it was at this beautiful moment that we also observed the tank asking not to fall for that stupid talk. Since at the moment they fought against this opponent, it was basically a death sentence, meaning he has no other option. Following them one way or another, they will be training him, dragging him up at any moment. But on the contrary, he doesn't take a step back, no. He continues to say that he was there just as a supporter. He wasn't strong or weak, but he will be taking care of some things. He can only give a tiny bit of support, but that's enough. We also observe from another place the blondie laughing at our protagonist's face. He laughs at the sadness since a companion abandoned him, but our protagonist also starts laughing. This wasn't basically his point, he didn't know what was happening. So everyone has the right to enter the abyss and also get out of the abyss. For that, they will have to make some choices, and our protagonist also made his choice here. Since he made his choice, our red one also did. He will be fighting here and will not take a step back either. He pulls out a small hacker and also prepares a punch to attack our protagonist. Well, he not only prepares, but also lashes that punch on the arms of our big guy, but his punch wasn't so strong. Just a little bit in this play, he is thrown back a bit, hitting a rock there. Thrown back, our protagonist realizes that this blondie was stronger than he imagined, right? I thought that one punch and I would finish the fight, but it's tough. However, also following his instinct is the strongest creature he has ever encountered. Sweat ran down his face, but minutes later he widened his eyes. The reason was that this guy appeared right in front of him, but now a little more serious, with a punch ready again. He runs towards our protagonist, but if he were caught, he would be in the worst shape in the story. So he ends up jumping a bit upwards, jumping up. Our protagonist dodges, and that guy hits the ground, cracking it completely. Looking up at our protagonist, he comments that anything in his way was just something to beat up, as his goal was always to beat up anyone. But from another place here, we observe that he sang, so he didn't believe what was happening. His eyes were possibly deceiving him about what was going on. Waking up a bit from reality, that enemy tank of his ends up giving him a kick to the face, waking him up, also shocking him a bit to the side. Yes, falling a bit to the side, he ended up with his hand on the ground so as not to fall completely. With his eyes a little open, he realizes that his end has come. Well, there's nothing more to do. The tank was already raising his knife up. The guy was down there, unable to do anything at the moment. Next, as that tank was about to finish off our singer, 1010 appears from behind that tank, asking it to attack his companion. Holding him from behind, he asks him to do something. This brat was always getting in the way. However, this wasn't the moment because next, that enemy tank turns at high speed, and with a simple cut, that tank ends up cutting the chest of his tank companion. He is thrown back a bit, but still falling a bit back. He shouts for that P to do something, anything, to help the team since now he hasn't done anything, just gotten in the way. He was the group leader, so he should do something, and his power was great. While these things happen, he crouches lower and lower. The little guy died while the other just watched the scene. Before, he had accepted the proposal from his group leader because he was level 3. Moreover, he was more than adequate to be the leader, and what he thought the most was that he wouldn't have to deal with monsters. So he accepted the proposal more than gladly. But now he will have to deal with the consequences. At that moment, he just thinks about what he should do since he considers himself just any loser. He thought about revealing to everyone that he was just a weak guy who couldn't even deal with a weak level 1 spider. So he ends up falling to his knees, crying. He ends up shouting that he was just a simple noob, so he begs for mercy, but it didn't help, because in his direction, we see that his enemy tank is getting closer little by little. As he approached, he ended up having some memories of a former companion who said that he was just a weak guy. He here didn't manage to cause any damage, and he only managed to gain experience because he used some buffs. It was no use at all, since the buffs he used only to hinder them at the most effective moment, so he asks to leave his team. Soon they then advance, and at this moment, their sad down only just accepts the proposal that he was just a useless noob. Only there the scene Geno's cut to another place. At this moment, we see him in a square. Only in this square appears an unknown person, but this unknown person, guess who? It was our little yellow guy. At this moment, he appears making a proposal that he has a job, and if he was looking for one, he could be joining his team before he can accept the proposal. He only comments that he is level 3, a weak guy, That didn't matter that much. Not then. At this moment, he ends up being interrupted his sad chats there because he shouts for him to drop negative things and just join his team. Because soon, looking a little there to the side, we see our protagonist there still lying on the ground, depressed. We see that blonde guy there who was still approaching our protagonist to counterattack him again. Our PR is lying on the ground, just not able to move anymore. We see there beside him that his enemy approaching as fast as possible to be giving the last blow in our protagonist, the final blow that will be ending him, because to also end our protagonist OB will be using another ability, a martial arts technique. It is used only in critical moments where he will be sinking our protagonist in the pit of destruction. Already, since this ability of his will also break some bones of his, so he will not be able to move anymore, and so he attacks our protagonist, but he knowing that if he was caught, it would be bad. He ends up kicking that ground again. The guy again hits the ground, even running. He is not escaping, because this was a fighting ability that can even paralyze even the master of magic and will not run for long. Our prota even realizes that he was getting even faster, so he starts to solve running faster, but there while running he looked back. But while looking back, he wondered where he would get a guy who had a DSB ability. Well, after thinking a little here and there, he remembers that he does have that guy there. What do you think the Nozao then? Thus widening his eyes, he runs in the direction of our singer 1010, and thus fighting against that his opponent. He calls for our zoo, aka that our singer 1010. He then looks in his direction asking what was that. Our little yellow throws our protagonist in his direction, not being able to do anything. He ends up falling on the ground now beside our Zoe. We see him there, wondering what was happening but lying now closer than ever to the singer. 1010, our protagonist with crazy talk. Certainly it was useless to try to get rid of the weakness of the past and also of his incompetence of the past, only that our protagonist always dreamed of being able to reach the peak of power, so he ended up achieving half of it. But before he can be achieving this real hacker of our system, he was just a guy who was disappointed by everyone. Everyone underestimated our protagonist. Also, everyone was refusing our prota in any kind of way. The team, however, cannot be trying to run away because being weak was not something you should be afraid of. What you should be most afraid of were some things roasted. The little creature suffered. He was even ambushed by some strong monsters, but there he realized that his heart was basically very weak. That same monster that captured our protagonist was commanding him to drag himself up in minutes, but he refused. He refused to want to lose. So there, at the last moment, he used his last broken machete to try to get rid of it, but it was useless. The beast was much stronger than him, but he would not give up. He then tries to deal a critical hit, and he manages to do so. He ends up hitting the monster in the eye, and by hitting the monster in the eye, he manages to defeat it. Now, with it lying on the ground, he stands over this monster and cannot believe he actually managed to kill a high-rank monster. He was just a loser that no one wanted on their team, and it was here that he found the strength to take the first step. At this moment, he stands up and wipes a bit of blood from his mouth. Now he comments that he was preparing to become the king in his entire life, even if he were to become a garbage collector like he was before. Trying to understand why he should go back to being king, he then looks in the direction of his sword, because if he does not get stronger, he will be dying. Compared to the previous zone, it was better to disguise and avoid fights, but he always managed to escape. However, now he wants to change these thoughts a bit. He wants to get stronger, and he wants to defeat strong monsters, increasing all his glory. That's when that tank appears, saying that this was a joke because the mere level 3 support would not even be able to scratch his level 17 armor. He would stand there and ask this weak level 3 guy to try his luck at scratching him, which he would not be able to do anyway. So, our 1010 singer grabs his machete in his hand, but he throws his machete to the side. The tank, not understanding anything, simply sees our singer pulling his microphone from his system. After pulling his microphone from his system, he tries to show him a new poem. This is the poem of the Great Disappointing. As soon as he comments on this, the tank widens his eyes, and not only does he widen his eyes, but also that blonde guy there. He widens his eyes and wonders what was happening. At this moment, our protagonist receives some buffs there too. Now, our protagonist has found the best and biggest debuff in the world that anyone could be seeing. Then, right after that, the system screen appears to our pro, showing that his system status has increased, his defense increased by 15%, his speed at the same time, his resistance, and also other things increased by 15% more than before. So at this moment, he ends up summoning a blood nightmare. After summoning the blood nightmare, it heads towards the ground. But in that direction, there was also the tank. However, that thing ends up sticking a little inside him, but not noticing the new clone of our protagonist. We see from behind our pro, but it was not our pro all this time. It was that clone. That clone then ends up grabbing him a little, and he makes a few turns with his tentacles, causing the tank to be unable to move anymore. At this moment, it might be his end, but for us here, in the previous chapter, this guy was caught by those tentacles of our protagonist. But at the moment he could no longer move, he asked for time, and begged to at least be kept alive while he was grabbed by those tentacles. We observed that singer of ours there, who was just watching him screaming on the ground. He screamed in pain, but at the same time he looked while the enemy tank fell into the slime of oblivion. On the other side, he ends up seeing our hero here, Kaino, hand in hand against that blonde of ours. He asks for our protagonist to die soon, but it was no use, the creature was smart. But still, even managing to hit him, he wouldn't suffer much damage since our boy didn't have a gigantic amount of magic within him. His body's regeneration speed was much faster than the damage received. So at this point, he couldn't be idling like this. He prepares to launch himself at his opponent, dagger in hand, he goes all out. But his opponent with just one punch stops his movement, but he doesn't stop there. Ye-Ching passes his dagger near him, hitting the guy squarely. He couldn't dodge, but looking to the side a bit, he's surprised to see that his armor wasn't working since he was pierced by that dagger. Only then does Ye-Ching comment that the stealth technique was basically one of the best he learned. He manages to ignore any type of defense, which was really useful for this moment. But still, he has that buff from his companion, so at this moment he goes all out at him because Ye-Ching wants to finish this fight as quickly as possible. So he runs, but our blondie simply finds it incredible how this was getting more and more amazing. Holding his dagger tighter than ever, he passes it beside our blondie, but he dodges the movement. But after 20 years of training, how could he lose to a brat like you with these little skills? He then starts to comment about this, landing a punch on his chin, launching him backwards, and now here he will show him his opponent what the difference in power martial arts can mean, several paths. You can follow a unique or different path that can also be changing the course of the battle. Ye-Ching drops his weapon to the ground, but after throwing his dagger then to the ground, Ye-Ching turns in the fastest direction possible towards the blondie, then the blondie prepares to punch him. Both punches from both. There end up colliding, a shockwave recoils through all this area where they were. Ye-Ching, minutes later, looks regal, because upon seeing our happy blondie, Ye-Ching comments that he really didn't like this kind of weak skills. So in his whole life, he decided to put all his points in destructive power, the breaking fist of killings he uses here in Ye-Ching, throwing him as fast as possible in another direction, passing between our singer and that tank fallen on the ground. After this, he ends up hitting with all the strength on the wall that was there. A wave of smoke arises there, but minutes later that smoke dissipates, and from the middle of it, he ends up emerging there. Ye-Ching stands up then after getting up the scene, already shows us the blondie, commenting that he was too dumb for trying to show his small strength in front of his strength. Ye-Ching spent 20 years using all his points in brute strength. Going mano a mano, you should never bet on a fight against our blondie because you will always lose. And at this moment, then our MC is seeing that he could really lose and ends up putting his hand in his jacket that was almost all torn around there. Then now he asks the system to add all the points in, strength 2, and at this moment the system appears adding 176 points in strength. His muscle ended up growing, making the guy much more buffed. The blondie then wonders what was happening because it seems now he got a little stronger than before, and also now he realizes that by adding 176 points in strength, he noticed that his muscle strength increased a lot. He gets happy with his new body, but even though he doesn't know the path of martial arts, he doesn't care about that, because his real focus is the ability to have the strongest punch. So he would end this fight as fast as possible. At this moment, he prepares a punch, but also our hero also prepares a punch too. but for having kind of activated 300 FPS of a single strength punch, he should already land this punch squarely. The punch should be enough to break some things, so the two punches from both end up colliding. But there, the blondie's punch ends up gaining an advantage, but in the end, who gained more advantage in the end was our protagonist, who here ended up managing to win the blondie's punch. He then, after receiving this punch in his hand, ends up being thrown backwards after being thrown back a little. He ends up looking at his hand. He sees that his hand was all broken. He gets surprised to see that a punch without skills managed to do this to him. But fallen on the ground, we see in the background, they're finding out quite strong. But our ends up jumping on the blondie while the blondie was there on the ground, totally knocked out. But to knock him out once and for all, Ye Qing jumps on top of him, grabbing his face. He starts wanting to test some things and also comments that there won't be much time for you to be shocked, since this battle should want to end as fast as possible. Like this, looking at Ye Qing, he can't believe what was happening. But going back like 8 years ago, the young blondie, who here ended up kind of being recruited to participate in a group, he was just a kind of collector too. But unlike our protagonist, he just picked up the equipment of his companions and cleaned. But at one moment, the one with yellow hair had a dream of joining a strong guild. And this one here was the unique opportunity since he had it. And if the one with yellow hair could prove his worth, the one with yellow hair would be able to finally become an official member of his group after cleaning the equipment a bit. He follows the path facing an extremely overpowered boss. But at this moment, he stays in the background, just observing if he can't prove here that he is competent. He might be leaving the group, and he doesn't want that, so he will be proving his worth in his mind. He imagined a type of hero who would run towards the monster and defeat it with just one punch. But looking a bit closer, Yellow Hair thinks that this was hard to really do, but now that he is facing a monster, he can't step back now. But at the moment, the monster ends up stomping hard on the ground, catching his attention. But it was too late, because the monster grabbed a type of club with its hand and smashed it on our blondie. He fell hard on the ground. At this moment, he ended up being completely knocked out. But minutes later, he ended up waking up, but now he was in a kind of futuristic hospital, where he ended up discovering that he had almost completely broken his bones. He couldn't move well for a long time. But also this here was a laboratory. But for some reason, they were looking for a person who had specific DNA. And well, this blondie had the specific DNA they were looking for. Yellow Hair here, by coincidence, will be able to have that good life living for a few more years, but the bad news was that he would be becoming a Rasta mist. So the days pass in front of a type of unknown place. A crest ends up falling in front of him. A guy comments that now he is worthy of joining his guild. So he was welcome in his group. Now he needed to place this crest on his arm to move forward, and so then he should follow their orders like a little dog. But now happy, he asks where his team was. But his leader comments that it was no use anymore. Those bunch of weaklings ended up all dying, and this was the proof he needed to pass, since in this world, you will be easily swallowed if you can't prove your worth. You will be treated like trash next. Then he ends up waking up. A system screen appears, showing that his defense had improved a lot. The destructive power increased a lot at the moment. He facing his enemy. He is surprised about this. But here then, he ends up observing to the side, then his opponent preparing a punch. But this punch seems to be slow at the same time strong. So he ends up being hit full on. After being hit full on, he ended up being dragged a bit back, but falling he wouldn't, because then he ends up putting his hand on the ground, holding a bit stronger on the ground. He stands still. This was the essence of the magic crystals also. This was the solidified energy and the surging magical power during the blood moon. These pure magic crystals are extremely powerful in this short period of time. So at this moment, he places that in front of our blondie also now. Because of the monster organs transplanted in our blondie, he ends up also being able to absorb the magical power of this crystal. And by doing that, he ends up for a few minutes or for some moment being able to have greater strength than the boss of this floor. But at this moment, when he talks about this, a system screen appears above him. Hint. This was a new boss that had just been detected. The new boss that our Ye Qing will have to defeat was ready to fall into hand-to-hand combat against him. But also at this moment, then the system appears giving some tips to our pro-ada. The basic mode ended now. He will be entering exhaustion mode for 30 seconds. He basically really known as a boy-level monster, because even the system classified this guy with the power of a superior boss of this dungeon here. And at this moment, then he wonders what really happened to this guy's body. While wondering about this in the background, we see our singer wondering if our protagonist was okay. Then as he wondered what was happening there from now on, or even the blondie there now, comments that all you need to have this power is to give up humanity at this moment. He ends up laughing loudly, and then there he ends up stomping hard on the ground. Our Ye Ching looks back, seeing there an option to be able to save the life of our singer. But at this moment, that one there screams for him to give up his human body and become the monster without moral restraint. Talking about this, he ends up throwing towards our protagonist some 3 stones. These 3 stones fly towards him. But our Ye Ching, who is not a bit dumb, easily dodges those stones running. Now we see from behind there the blondie appearing. He accepted the power and managed to gain a lot of power. Our hero can also have this power. He running ends up kind of turning towards his opponent to see what was happening, but there then ends up being caught. He didn't have time to run, that his opponent ends up piercing him. He is torn to pieces in the background. We see our singer who there locked himself completely. He sees that that guy's strength there increased a lot. There is no way to survive this anymore. Fallen on the ground. He comments that without a doubt, the trash has basically no power to fight against the players who are truly quite powerful. But he is proud because he recognizes the strength of our poet, the one who has hidden strength, who gave a bit of work to be defeated, but even with all this hidden power, he ended up being defeated with just a single punch. Disappointed with this, but even though he had exhausted all his strength, he still activated this gigantic power there. His body was just something unconscious, which means he never even had a chance to defeat our blondie, but now he realizes that the weak are always defeated by the strong. But he is disappointed with some things. One of these to become the strongest. He had to become this ugly thing here, and so then he starts laughing. Well, the ugliness wasn't so much, but the power was a lot. But here he ended up almost forgetting. Then at this moment, he ends up turning towards our singer, but approaching a little closer to our singer, he swears he didn't see anything about you becoming basically the ugliest person he saw in his life. However, he only heard footsteps approaching close to him. The singer wanted to survive, but that blonde-haired one asks him to at least die here since he hindered his mission. His mission was only to make everyone here become part of his army, but since in the end he hindered things, he will have to die because he ended up seeing everything that was happening here inside, that it would be ugly if he revealed to the whole world what happened here inside, and then at this moment he runs with all the power he has towards our singer. It was better that at the moment he die as a hero than to die just as a failure approaching. He asks him to wait, because he here had no choice. He was going to die anyway, but he had something he could be doing. So he gets too close to our singer approaching. He comments that he was just trash and talked too much. Then at this moment, he ends up putting his hand on the neck of our singer, lifting a little upwards. He asks the singer to say now his last words, but from behind, we see something happening. Our prota, who there was all smashed on the ground, ends up turning into a kind of slime. Then he continues to talk. He wants to leave the abyss here still alive, but even if he can't, he comments that he wouldn't be the only one who saw all this and managed to get out of here alive. He would witness all this tragedy that happened here inside and would tell the whole world everything that happened there inside. Then he ends up he turns towards our proa, who there then was emerging. But here he didn't understand what it was. And while there, our blondie was trying to understand what was happening behind that slimy thing. There he appears. He log our protagonist, who threw a glass on the ground, would tell the whole world everything that happened there inside. So he ends up he turns towards our bow that was then emerging, but here he didn't understand what it was. And while there, our blondie was trying to understand what was happening behind that slimy thing there. He appears soon, our protagonist who threw a glass on the floor. He thanks our singer because of him, he ended up getting a good little time. He then managed to take that there. That thing ended up canceling those their actions. But looking at the side there, he ends up putting that in the slime in his hand. He comments that if by chance that our blondie had looked a little closer, he would have discovered that the body was fake. But for not having managed to see this, He ended up getting a lot of time, but he also ended up putting a little information from his original body in that slime there, and managing to fool our Blondie a lot. But there was another place we observe our Blondie who here didn't understand that it was a nightmare of blood. So what he killed was just a clone. He gets sad, but at the same time he gets happy because he would have a second round. Another place here in another scene. Yeching interrupts our Blondie, commenting that the price of these superhuman powers was too heavy for him, and although Basar's combat skills increased a lot, the strength power of our protagonist, he ended up paying the price in the end for being too confident in that. The strength power gives a lot of power indeed, but also gives a gigantic exhaustion. So starting to walk towards our Blondie, who is now a monster, he comments that his body ended up confusing the powers. He ended up taking the human limit and mixing it with the power of a monster. And naturally, he ended up basically invading a territory that shouldn't be his. Then he should pay the price for what he just did. But on his part, he says not to play with this kind of joke since the power he has is his own and it has nothing to do with it. But as soon as he comments on this, he ends up losing attention. He turns to another place. His arm starts to emit a pain, and he there ends up screaming in pain, not understanding what was happening. He stops there for a few minutes after stopping. There for a few minutes, he tries to understand what really happened there. With his arms, while there our singer runs with all his might to the back while running. He understands a little, so he looks to the side. He sees Ye Qing approaching. So at this moment, he ends up understanding a little of things, and understands that really who caused all this was Ye Qing. So then he goes with all his power in hand there towards him to catch Ye Qing. But he had no chances because our boy easily managed to dodge that blow of his. He grabs his head after grabbing his head. He uses it as a springboard, jumping to the side. We see there in front of the blonde hair starts to run again with all his might towards himself. Only because he has transformed of shape of his body, his speed decreased a lot, and this allowed him to dodge only that his strength increased, so he should take a little more care at this moment. Ye Qing only just wanted to know one thing. Wanted to have a weapon. He cannot fight hand to hand against a brute force like this without being able to find a way out from the background. We observe our singer who there in hand, he was carrying something he calls for King, who here just received an attack in hand. But he uses his arms to defend himself after defending. He looks to the side looking, he sees there our singer who here asks that King hold his dagger. He then sees our singer throwing his dagger in his direction. It almost hits him, and Ye King easily grabs his dagger in the blink of an eye, grabs that lemon he prepares for. He prepares to finish off this new character. Our story today is about our gravedigger, who ended up receiving firsthand his dagger. That kind of fell before there in the middle of the fight with that brother. Now he observes in front of him his opponent appears. The Blondie then already goes with all the power he has, hand up to our protagonist, but now he possessed his dagger there that he received from his friend. Now with his dagger in hand, he defends himself from the attack. The blonde-haired who tried to attack our hero. Then he realizing that the blonde-haired was very slow. He then manages to get behind him. Now already knows from behind, our hero takes his fish and lifts it up with a little push. He ends up passing in the plot, weaving on him. The cuts were made on him right after it took effect on him. He ends up jumping back. But now our yellow one is surprised to see that our hero was giving a lot of critical hits, only that this was not true, since he ended up adding some points in his agility that allowed him to be a little faster, but this was not enough already, that now his goal was to finish off our hero, and the guy even becomes crazy, even asks to be humiliated, because if he did that, his death would be faster, maybe worse than the others, since his own existence was superior to theirs. Right there, then at this point he goes then with full steam to our hero hitting him. But he dodges only now from behind. He is surprised to see that he was feeling superior. In his hand, fire starts to appear already. Also, now that in his eyes, here currently, he is 100% monster. So it means that he can do whatever he wants now. With this guy in front of him, he then hits right on a fire that had brother there in his face, landing a blow. He paralyzes a bit there after stopping. He looks fixedly in the direction of our poet. But this only makes him more and more irritated. making our Blondie become basically now, at this moment, a complete monster. He becoming a type of Godzilla Hulk mixed. Well, he became a little stronger, but the beast is crazy with blood in his eyes to catch our big boy here. But now that he stopped to look there, he realizes that he can no longer save him since he has delved much deeper into that power of his. He feels worried, but our gravedigger here understands that now he can take. But this was the fight already since he hears the voice coming from the abyss. Then, at this moment, he would attack his opponent, but he realizes that he didn't need to do this anymore because looking at him, he realizes that he was already becoming an irrational beast. And here at the moment, he was attacking the air. The crazy guy he didn't even see at which point he should be attacking. But in the background, we observe then there that our singer 1010 realizes that he went completely crazy, so there is nothing else to do now. So now it was our chance to finish him off. But at this moment there, while they were watching the Blondie every minute getting crazy in the head, we observe in the background there our protagonist approaching his leader, but at the moment then they thought in doing something, any tiny thing, and the system appears, saying that they needed to keep the boss here alive, but he wonders what kind of thing was that, since even if he does nothing, his own team wouldn't let him live. If by chance there came all that just happened, seeing the face there of the beast turned into a little monster, even quite ugly old. But at this point he realizes that if by chance there he completed this mission, he would receive some good and rare rewards, so he should try to do it. But he asks to remember some of his words, because already remembering those words, he will be able to attract their attention. He only has 5 seconds. This was quite enough to do whatever he wanted. But here there is no need also to be killing him. He doesn't understand why he wouldn't kill him, since here he is a monster. And well, a monster now belongs to the abyss. He shouldn't be disturbing the basic cycle of life. And also people who give up their humanity to become a monster are basically something unacceptable by humanity. But there, the abyss understands that humans will no longer want that guy there. So at this point, the abyss ends up accepting him there as a beast of its own creation, and he ends up being received with open arms. And this is also the basic regulation of an abyss. So he there transformed into a monster, heads in a specific direction, since he also heard that monsters enter the Basara state during the blood moon. But during the blood moon, what really gives is insanity to the person there who became the monster, but also this gives prison close to the person to the monster there. But he only puts his life when someone goes there to defeat him and send him to another world. He will have a few seconds to think about what he did in life. But while the beast was following in that forest, we observe from another place that one there that tried to deceive our MC. The last time he ran there. Also, he now managed to find a chest. The kid Ardor thinks that he was rich. He was made. He would buy everything house money, even women, if he jokes. But here, he thinks that his life changed from now on by opening the chest. He ends up receiving some cards. So now realizing that the equipment was good, he realizes that he was finally rich freedom equipment. New identity was there with himself. No one else in the world will be taking that from him now, laughing with the greatest happiness, as loud as possible. On the contrary, also he ends up attracting the attention of the monster of our Blondie, who ended up becoming the monster. He appears there behind him, right there. But now he doesn't understand the real danger that was happening to him, but this we didn't know, because our scene is cut to a totally unknown bar. But in this bar, we observe there our singer 1010. He is happy to see that he managed to get out of that DJO and still alive, but also left the boss inside. Maybe this would be bad. Our MC even vents soon. Then we observe our protagonist, seeing there that even if he wants to be fighting against the boss, maybe he wouldn't be able to win, but now that one, our singer 1010, gets happy for our MC, right old? Since now he owes a lot to our hero. Well, he stops and thinks he understands that it was nice a little bit there just now. But looking back now, he understands that he ended up talking a little bit of b-bag about everything that happened there. So he asks to do that nothing happened. But of course not. He just wanted to contribute for the support and the strength he gave there in the most specific moment, for him to be able to fight against his fears. He wanted to repay this to our hero, and he even comes up with a kind of strategy. He asks to imagine this since he is the boss. He could be moving forward while he would stay behind, strengthening behind him. and so they would make a team quite strong. But our Emic realizes that his chats were already going in another direction, so he asks him not go into the abyss anymore like this. Only he doesn't understand what the boss was trying to say about. He didn't want to go into the abyss anymore, and then he starts to think that his ability is to make his friends around him stronger, but he was weak and needed protection. So he feels very sorry already since he doesn't want to see Zug Tang there biting the dust when entering a DGO, so to ensure that he won't enter so soon. Inside a ride, he ends up putting his hand in front of him to the side. The guy doesn't understand why he was doing this. Only a system screen appears giving him 1,000 magic crystals here. It was these magic crystals that he had the most there for him. This was enough for him to live a good life for a long time. However, he could no longer be entering the abyss. Well, he understands what our protagonist means by this. Since he just wants the best for his own friend here, he doesn't want to see his friend die. However, he ends up refusing the crystals from our MC, since he didn't want to live like garbage, even if he wants something there in the world. Since he doesn't want to see people treating him more like garbage. Our MC, looking at him, understands that his vision was a little more convincing, and maybe it would be difficult to make him back down there from his word. So he thinks that with a smile, he ended up realizing that he can't protect himself, and how can he protect others? So he remembers to think a little since in the hand. He carries the microphone in hand. But now he puts on the table a sword. This was Lei's sword Then he ends up realizing that some things that he could be doing, since according to his information about bards, it's a kind of job that comprises the middle kind of magician that is kind of typical physical and wizard too, since he can also be using magic weapons to cast spells to strengthen his own business, SOS equipment. And well, he can master this kind of attack spell, and if before he wasn't able to swing a sword before for Lakin, he basically should try his best from now on, since this is a favor he needs to take for himself, since he needs to get strong. So he understands the real reason of our MC, so he asks that our doesn't deliver the magic crystals for him. But he asks to deliver that to the Elzon family, since by giving this in the future, they will be gaining much more than they would be gaining here. Anyway, he understands we'll be doing this only here. The scene is already cut to another place here in the abyss, where our protagonist was before we observe some people appearing here. Our demonetization. This ends up appearing commenting that there appeared the people there to investigate what just happened inside that dungeon. So researching a lot, they ended up discovering some bodies of people that were difficult to identify, but after so much research, they discovered moreover, they end up discovering that their leader ended up becoming a monster due to the corruption of the abyss, and now he has already been treated according to what they should do, and also discovered that additional colors were added there, and we also discovered that that traitor from before ended up kind of being found too, only not so well since they ended up kind of fighting the blondie turning into a monster, fought against that traitor, and in the end, he ended up not having that end so good, and then just with the factor they ended up kind of failing, they realized they made a mistake. Behind appears A, so their plan ended up failing. Well, to say it failed was not so big, since they managed to turn that guy into a monster, but it was a total mistake to give such great power to him, but now that it failed, they should be now, at the moment, looking for other people with the same Daniel as the one with the yellow hair. There had only, while they were thinking about it, the scene is already cut to another place, since in a hospital we observed there, in a room further back, someone apologizing and he was a mean father, and he ended up kind of doing this to, be able to save himself, so in hand, he ends up putting a key to open an abyss. He needed to do this again, but this time he will do it right, so he opens that portal. A portal then ends up being opened inside the hospital. Inside that hospital, we observe a crack appearing dirty lightning from there. The people below get scared and do not understand why something like this was happening here soon. Then another extra appears looking in front of the portal. Now he understands what that was. It was an abyss portal that decided I don't know out of nowhere to appear in the middle of the hospital. Now then he shouts to call to get in touch there for the officers to take care of the monsters and the beast. Everything only in another place. We observe some little boys running, but he asks his sister not to look back. Run without thinking many things here, they needed to run as fast as possible. Since behind appeared the scorpion monster that then attacks him, that almost gets our hero only. He dodges it, hitting the ground completely, falling there to another place only, also looking to another place. He ends up observing his sister being devoured there by this monster, only at this moment he ends up shouting and also ends up waking up after this little scare that just happened. Next, he starts to sweat cold and tries to look at what was happening. Guy next. All this, he ends up sleeping and thinks that this maybe was a dream again. These dreams were being repeated all the time in his head, but at this moment, he ends up grabbing his necklace and almost forgets the important things he needed to do soon. Then he ends up leaving. He goes to the place where they sell flowers. So at this moment, he approaches there the woman who sells flowers. He asks for Miss Zhang to deliver him the usual bouquet. She gets surprised to see that he showed up again since he was always here buying the bouquets to deliver to his little sister who was in the hospital. Well, they had a small unfortunate attack. But there she thinks that our protagonist was a good brother only, that she starts to notice other things since he changed haircut. So he starts to chat a bit. Since when he would come here, a guy would appear in front of us out of nowhere and pulls him to his barber shop, and there he started to make some weird cuts, but here he would be able to choose already the bouquet of flowers that he wanted for himself. And so then after choosing for a little while his bouquet of flowers, he ends up following the path. But in the next moment, he ends up seeing several trucks following the right path. Only that, while following the trucks, we observe there, the lady wondering why she was following towards the hospital, several police convoy trucks there. Not understanding why this. He then stops, but he understands that he was following towards the hospital where his sister was. He jumps, and with all the power, he follows a specific direction, passing between the buildings. He ends up arriving at the place where he so much wanted to arrive. The police below asked to increase security since it was dangerous to let any kind of civilian enter inside this portal. But from above he appears, and at this moment he doesn't understand why an abyss portal was doing here in the middle of the city, so he ends up landing on the ground. He follows towards the portal, but at this moment the guard there tries to ask him to step back a bit, since he was just an ordinary person, and ordinary people shouldn't be doing anything here. He asks him to leave here, but he understands a moment later there that he wasn't an ordinary person, because a light emanated from our hero. Then he just lets this hero pass by him. He follows towards the portal while behind, he just watched the boy entering there little by little in the portal. But still, another officer appears scolding that guard there who let our hero enter the portal. He asks to pull our protagonist away from there, but he asks not to worry. This is a guy who came along with other people, only that he was a bit different from the people they saw before there. So it shouldn't be a good idea to mess already with our protagonist, understanding. He said it was all right. So there. So then he entering, he asks for her to wait, because his brother appeared here, just to be going there to help her. Inside this portal, and well, he will do everything to save his sister, who possibly is there inside the portal soon. Then our hero ends up entering that dimension. Upon entering this dimension, he ends up realizing that the portal ended up swallowing the hospital, transforming the place that was small into an extremely giant place. But now, looking closer, our protagonist can see cracks on the floor, which means that a type of squad of people has already come here and has already entered this place before him. But on the floor, there was an extremely expensive potion bottle, which meant that who was here inside was not a weak person or a strong person, but was a very rich person for being there inside. But he ends up picking up that bottle that was on the floor with that in hand. He asks that that bottle return to its previous form, that it return to the form that had a magical effect. Soon then the system appears commenting that the magic of the potion ended up returning, giving him 85% recovery of his MP, also giving recovery of his HP. But now looking at that bottle, he realizes that even alone he took control of the abyss. He realizes that the small zoo was in danger. So which means that he would be in danger too if they advanced. So before he can do anything, he needs to prepare as quickly as possible. So he ends up thinking about what he should do. Since looking ahead, he ends up finding many obstacles. Okay, not so many. Because in this place here, he only finds a totally giant abyss, but he uses one of his eyes there. The system gives some tips to our protagonist. He ends up kind of finding a point. But this point just ends up leading to a certain place. But, well, right, if he enters a totally wrong place, there is no way back. So he ends up noticing some marks on the floor. These marks were certainly from the hunters who entered here, which means that they entered there. So our MC, on the contrary, will enter through the other side of the door to be able to find certain people who were trapped inside this dimension. And so then opening a passage he enters. But entering, he is not so sure how long he will be taking to be able to find the certain things he is looking for here inside. But to do his research, he will be taking a long time to be able to explore these caves and these unknown places here. Well, and besides, our protagonist realizes that he needed to be as fast as possible, since a person like a human certainly would not be able to survive for a long time in this abyss here. So he needed in every way to hurry as quickly as possible to save the person or someone who was trapped inside this dungeon.